welcome to the Horror Screams podcast. We are part of the Horror Screams Video Vault website. I'm Stephen, and I'm joined here, as always, by my co-host, Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hello there, how's you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, how's your month been since the last recording?
Oh, just about as quiet as it has been, although the weather's been nice.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, here in England, we've had like sunshine and stuff. Do you remember, I don't know when it was, maybe 2 weeks ago, we had like 6 different kinds of weather in about 2 hours. Do you
Yeah,
remember
we
that
did.
day?
Yeah. That was a Monday, like 4
Yeah,
seasons in one day.
really
It
impressive. Like, wow,
craziness.
apocalyptic, but yeah. That was like snow, hail, sunshine. Oh, it's nice. Oh, it's turned cold again. Oh, rain, volcano going off in the background. Yeah, it was quite something. Good old England.
Good old 2021.
Oh, global warming. Yes, 2020. It's still 2021. We're recording this at the end of April. This is episode 18 of the Horror Screams podcast, which is incredible.
Whew.
Hope you've been enjoying our previous episodes and enjoyed our last one on remakes. We'll have to do a remake of that episode at some point, I suppose, just to keep the continuity going.
Yep.
Yeah, today we've got a very exciting episode. We're going to be all nostalgia festy today because we're going to talk about the Nightmare on Elm Street films, all 7 of them, because the remake doesn't exist. And yeah, we're going to have a high old time talking about those. We're going to pick our favourites at the end and see how our kind of top 7 pans out if we've got the same choices. And yeah, it's all going to be good. But first, of course, as is tradition, we're going to have a look at our recently seen, what we've been watching, apart from the many Freddy films that we've gone back to, especially for this podcast. So, Sarah, since the last recording, what have you seen? Anything decent?
Oh, well, we certainly have. The first one I'm
Yes.
starting off with is a show on Shudder. It's season 2 of Creep Show, and I really hope everyone's watched it.
Nice.
It's so good. The first episode was probably the highlight of my entire year, I think. You saw it as well, didn't you?
Yeah, huge fun. Yeah, that's the only one I've seen so far, but that was great. Yeah.
Oh, it started off so well. You kind of think like the first episode was very hard to beat. And to be fair, they haven't actually managed to beat it as yet. But the first episode was just so wonderful. The first story was so nostalgic about a young kid who was in the 50s or who loves like 50s movies like
Yeah.
Gilman and werewolves and all that kind of stuff. That was really nostalgic. I think that was directed by Greg Nicotero. I think the second one was as well, but the second one was my all-time favourite episode in the world. It was called Public Television of the Dead, and it was basically kind of like a rehash of Evil Dead. It was the best thing ever, set in a TV studio. And it had Ted Raimi in it, had a really great Bob Ross character, which was hilarious, who was painting happy trees and little cabins in the wood and stuff like that. Oh, it's just so brilliant. The effects were amazing, and Ted Raimi as a Deadite was just brilliant. It was so much fun.
Yeah, that was great, wasn't it? That was unexpected as well, because I don't really read much about these shows before they come out or when they're being made or anything. So when I found out it was an Evil Dead riff, that was a great surprise. So really cool.
It was a surprise to me. I knew it was coming along, but I didn't know. I'd basically seen like pictures of Ted Raimi, but in this season, they did it in season 1. They had a few people, like well-known actors and stuff in the first season, didn't they? But this season, they seem to have a lot more. There's always one person that you go, oh my God, it's him, that turns up in the next stories and stuff. So far, they've had Ted Raimi. Episode 2, they had Josh McDermott, who was brilliant.
Cool.
The last episode, they had Ryan Quanten. And then this episode that aired just this Friday gone had Barbara Crampton in it. You know, it's really good. So much fun. They haven't actually managed to beat episode 1, but it's doing really well this time. It's just so much fun, and it's just so great to see. I love it being back.
Yeah, it's really cool, isn't it? I like the last one. Was the last one the holiday special, like at Christmas? That was the one-off, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, the Christmas one, yeah, with the fairies and people changing us. Oh, yeah, that was hilarious.
And kind of self-help group. Yeah, that was huge fun. I never saw the animation one for Halloween with Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, so good, so good. Honestly, they do amazing things. I love that show. It's one of my favourites. Even when I was a kid and still now. Love it. I'd watch it over anything. If something else is on, I'm like, no, Creep Show's on. It has to wait.
Yeah, it does a nice job, doesn't it? Of like, because as you said, the original one in the 80s was such a big thing for us. on video.
Mm,
Such a easy to rewatch thing as well, and it does a really good job of invoking the memories of that. I think it's very much
yeah.
the same style and the same
Yep.
kind of stories, and obviously made by people that were as affectionate about Creepshow the movie as we were. So that's
Hmm.
that's the best. Cool.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. On that note, I've also finally, or it's been the final episode of The Walking Dead season 10. Hooray!
Hi.
Which I think has been going on for about 2 years now.
Yeah, I had no idea it was still season 10. That has been 2 years, right?
Oh, honestly, I'm sure it has. And I think I probably mentioned in the last episode that the episodes that have aired this year have not been great. But the final episode was one did bring it back up again because you actually finally get Negan's backstory. A little bit out of the blue compared to the way the rest of the episodes have been going. But yeah, it was really good. It was more heartfelt and a little bit different to how it has been these last few episodes, which kind of made you think of it fondly. You're like, oh, at least it ended on a high when the rest of the episodes this year have been so boring, you have to say.
Oh man.
But no, it ended on a good one. It wasn't quite as spectacular as I was expecting it to be, but you learned some things about Negan you definitely didn't know at the time and come out of it a little bit wiser.
That's cool. So, is this series been partly filmed in COVID times? Is that what it is?
I think so, yeah. They must have had to
Okay.
have done some of it over the time to keep it going, I think. But
Yeah,
yes, it's just been so disjointed. You're kind of not entirely sure what's going on. To see what happens in season 11.
sure. Yeah. Do they have a plan for it? Like, is there a master plan, do you think, or are they just kind of making up as they go along?
No,
Is
I
it?
think that right now, yeah, they're just making it up as they go along.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they keep saying, "Oh yeah, it's going to end." I feel like last I heard that season 11 is going to be the end, but I'm not entirely sure. Probably never is. You know what they're like. They say things like that, and then they backtrack straight away, and they're like, "No, no, we never said that. We're going to do this instead."
Yeah. Because I guess they never dreamed it would go on this long. I guess I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty long run for this kind of show, especially, isn't it? Like,
Mm.
um, hmm.
But
I
yeah,
will
we shall
catch up.
see. Yeah, you got plenty of time. Who knows when the next one's coming out?
Oh yeah, Jesus.
What else have I recently watched? Oh, my final one that I'm going to mention is a very hilarious South Korean zombie movie called Zombie for Sale. That is on Amazon Prime at the moment, I think. Um,
Yeah.
it's so quirky, it's silly. It's definitely more of a comedy than it is a horror. Um, it gets straight to the point, is in there's a zombie in it straight away, but there's only one zombie in it for like most of the movie, and then at the end it goes completely nuts. But it's hilarious. It's definitely not done as seriously as some of them are, and you think like One Cut of the Dead turns out to be kind of a comedy of its own, doesn't it?
Yes.
Zombie for Sale is completely different to that as well. They tend to use in Korea and stuff, you're seeing people in suits and you're thinking they're all quite rich. This time they're using people in the country, poor families, that kind of find this zombie and take him in type thing. It kind of goes along the lines of a bit of a teeny romance type thing because he's not very scary or ferocious. And in the end, they kind of end up feeding him cabbages and stuff. So, like, treating him like he's a vegetarian. But then at the end of the movie, they start using him and getting money and stuff for him biting people because people don't turn straight away. With the older population, it seems to make them younger first. So you think he's like the
Yeah.
fountain of youth. So they're getting loads of money so they can do up their garage and all that kind of stuff. And then it all goes wrong.
Hmm.
But it's very hilarious. It gets loads of like really good reviews on IMDb and stuff. I think quite a lot of people like it. It's very light-hearted and you can have quite a few giggles.
That's cool. I do
It's good
like a
fun.
lot of South Korean stuff. They
Yeah,
seem to be like a massive breeding ground for great filmmakers and
yeah.
interesting horror films, comedies. That's cool. That's on Amazon, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Nice. Wunderbar.
Yeah. Oh, and my final one is actually a massive guilty pleasure. Um, when I'm not sitting watching horror movies, I quite often watch really rubbish TV. And one of the rubbish TV programs I'm really into at the moment is Gogglebox. I don't know if anybody knows about this, but it's an English TV show that records people watching TV and their reactions. But it's absolutely hilarious. The best thing they do, they quite often they have them watching, like, I don't know, thrillers and the news and stuff, but they quite often pop in the odd horror movie, and it's absolutely hilarious watching people who don't like horror movies watching horror movies, because it's hilarious. I think they've done Scream, and they're absolutely shitting themselves watching Scream, and but recently they recorded them watching Paranormal Activity, and it was hilarious. You think that, you know, most people have probably seen it by now, but most of these people had obviously never seen it before, and they were just like jumping out of their seats and screaming, and it was just hilarious. I find it very amusing.
Great. Paranormal Activity. Wow. All right, that seems like a while ago now. I really liked that back in the day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that definitely made me jump quite a lot. But yeah, watching people that you think if that's done the circulations by now, everyone's in Paranormal Activity. But no, they haven't, and they're just climbing up the sofas. It's hilarious. Very funny. You think I wouldn't have time to watch all that, because, yeah, we've been sat watching all the Elm Street movies and stuff, but there's always time for a bit of that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Wow. I would hate to be watched when I'm watching TV. That would be so embarrassing. All the ridiculous tears shed during different things, and indeed me freaking out during Host last year on Shudder. So,
yeah.
Practically stuck to the sofa because I was just got the hot sweats. Wow. Nice bunch of stuff. Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen a few things. I've been watching a lot of old stuff, including obviously the Elm Street saga, but did manage to catch a couple on Shudder, which one of which Sarah has already mentioned, which was Fingers.
Yes, you watched it.
Which is really good.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, we've said it before, but Shudder just seemed to have a knack of picking up the really good end of low budget or independent horror, and especially, I suppose, quite a good line in black comedies, which Fingers is very much part of that. Fingers is maybe a horror movie, but it's really a black comedy in the spirit of things like Cheap Thrills. You know, the kind of almost surreal, what could go wrong or what could go weird next thing. And the less you know about Fingers, I think, the better. You never really know where it's going anyway, but you wouldn't want anyone to spoil it. It does have, and I wish I could quote it because it's so great, but again, it would spoil it. It does have one of the great last lines of a recent film that I've heard, which is in the form of a letter, and it's just such a great line to end a really cynical and weird film on. But in short, it's really hard to describe, really, but it's kind of a story of a pregnant woman. She's not in love with her boyfriend. She's kind of losing it. She's got a whole bunch of irrational fears going on, and a lot of weird shit's happening. Even a visit to like the bakery is strangely unsettling, like a David Lynch film. And there's a guy at work that seems to be missing a different finger each time he comes into work. She goes to see a shrink who's totally unreassuring, like comes around with his own chip and pin machine for her fee and just wants to plug his own book, and it just gets weirder and weirder. I mean, it's the line that springs to mind is, "I'm not a racist, but short black men freak me out," and you have to watch the film to know why that's in the film. The fact that it's got the old guy from The Greasy Strangler was a big selling point for me, because I thought The Greasy Strangler was really hilarious, and I know it's such an acquired taste, it's ridiculous, but it's really clever, and it's totally unpredictable. It escalates, it keeps going and going, and when you find out the gist of the plot, you're like, oh right, okay. But Fingers, hugely entertaining, very rewatchable too, and it's got a collection of great performances by people I hadn't really seen before, I don't think, apart from the old guy from The Greasy Strangler, who doesn't have a name, he's just the old guy from The Greasy Strangler.
And Jeremy Gardner, of course.
Oh God, yes. Oh, how could I forget? Yeah, Jeremy Gardner from The Battery and After Midnight, who is fantastic and ridiculously talented. He's got a very good role in this, especially if you're a fan of those two earlier films. It's good to see that side of Jeremy Gardner. So yeah, check it out. Similarly, also with one word in its title, is Slacks, 2 X's, which also premiered on Shudder at some point quite recently, at least in the UK. And this is really clever. I was quite surprised by this. I mean, on the surface, it's a film about a killer pair of jeans, a possessed pair of jeans, that do things like dance to Bollywood tunes and bite your arms off if you're not careful. So, but it's also I mean, it's heavy-handed. I suppose it's not subtle, but then again, why would you want a film about killer genes to be subtle? It's a kind of consumerist satire about this awful kind of this hideous clothes shop, kind of a top shop kind of affair in Canada, full of terrible, obnoxious, awful people, and having the occasional visit from an even more awful, horrible YouTube influencer who you just want to die immediately. And when it comes down to it, it's a kind of satire about how do you think we can sell these jeans for $5? Sorry, how do you think we can sell these jeans for $150? But they really just cost $5 to make.
Yeah.
And the twist in it's really good. I mean, it's basically a kind of sweatshop version of the Japanese horror films, like The Ring. At its core, the plot is essentially, and I actually quite liked it when it turned serious. It turned serious in maybe the last third or so. The rest of it's very broadly played by the cast, but good fun. But when it turns serious and you think, oh, okay, so that's the story, you think, oh, right, yeah, okay, this is kind of an important story to be told. So it's a horror comedy with a downbeat twist that it earns, I think. So Slacks is, is really worth watching if you get a chance. Very short as well. Both these films are refreshingly in the under 90-minute kind of category, which we like. Very much. We like that. In an age when Spider-Man films are almost 3 hours long, it's good to have films at a normal length.
Yeah.
Other than that, I rewatched Battle Royale, which has got a new 4K release from Arrow Video coming out next week, or next week as we're recording this, which is the end of April in the UK. Battle Royale is 20 years old now. Unbelievable.
No way.
Yeah, which means we're 20 years older, Sarah.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I was 5 when Battle Royale came out. It's one of my favorite DVDs. Yeah, it's a great movie. I haven't seen it for years. Everybody must know Battle Royale. It's the old things are really bad in Japan, so we're sending the delinquent youths to a kind of remote island, and they're basically going to kill each other until one wins and emerges triumphant. And it's been hugely influential. There's loads of films that have come after it that work on the same idea, notably the Hunger Games films, which are less interesting, although I still quite like them. And this is the original, although even this, I suppose, is riffing on earlier films like The Running Man and earlier books like Lord of the Flies. It's essentially Lord of the Flies meets The Running Man and a few other things. But it's really good. I mean, it's still quite shocking, the fact that these people that are trying to kill each other to stay alive are essentially year 9, which I think makes them about 13 or 14 years old, although clearly played by slightly older teenagers. Makes it disturbing. It does have a great sense of humor, but some of the violence has still got a real edge to it, and it looks great. I mean, it's largely set outside in the daylight, so restored on the Blu-ray, it looks really, really good and new. And I think partly because everybody's wearing the same clothes, school uniform, it hasn't really dated either. It still looks pretty fresh.
Yeah.
The only thing you notice says these teenagers are not using phones; they're using a Polaroid camera at one point, which obviously now would be a surefire sign that they've been possessed.
Yeah.
Kind of heretic. But it's well worth picking up. If you haven't seen Battle Royale, you should. You've seen it, obviously, Sarah?
Yeah. I have it on a nice shiny disc.
Nice. It's really good. The sequel is part of this set, but I never really liked the sequel very much. It's a bit kind of to give it the technical term. Yeah, the sequel is kind of more of the same. It's very politically charged. It's kind of extraordinarily bold, really, because it opens with 2 very large towers being brought down and came out a couple of years after 9/11. But it's also a little bit boring, strangely. You're like, oh, right, yeah, I'd rather watch the original, thanks.
Yeah.
But yeah, both of them are available in this set. So Battle Royale is a good one. One more quick one to mention is, it's actually a few years old now, and I finally got around to watching it, a great little independent film called They Look Like People, which is on Amazon Prime. And so is the director and cast's next film, which is called Siren, which I haven't got around to watching, but apparently is also interesting. This is a really good film. I mean, this is one of my favorite things I've seen recently, probably. It's another one, maybe like Fingers, that's hard to describe too much without giving anything away. I'll just keep you guessing all the way through it. It's basically about this guy, him and his friend have both kind of had some relationship problems. One of their marriages has fallen through. The other guy has just had his engagement broken off because his girlfriend cheated on him. and the guy called Wyatt keeps receiving a bunch of weird phone calls that tell him that there's a war coming. He needs to trust no one, and that lots of people are changing into kind of shapeshifters. So he's been told by these weird phone calls that he needs to be watching out very carefully, and that the city is about to just crumble thanks to a whole bunch of mysterious creatures that have taken over humans. So you're not quite sure whether Wyatt, who's unstable anyway, but a really nice guy, you're not sure if he's going insane or if this thing is about to all happen. It keeps you guessing throughout. There's some really disturbing things. One of the earliest shots in the movie is, I suppose, one of those small moments of horror that really haunts you, where he's in bed with his partner and he turns around and her face is completely blank in the dark, which is such a chilling image. And the movie doesn't have any jump scares, really. It just has a lot of moments like that. Extremely creepy, but it's also founded on a couple of really nice natural performances, two really likable characters, two male leads for a change, who have a convincing friendship. You really root for them, and you really, Wyatt's leading character, you really don't want Wyatt's suspicions of what's going on to be true, but then you don't want him to be going completely mad either. So you're just rooting for him. So strong recommend. It has an amazing ending. It's very low budget, but it doesn't really matter because it doesn't need any big effects. But if you get a chance to watch They Look Like People, it's a guaranteed kind of creepy good time. Also, it handily falls into the same category as everything else we just mentioned. It's an hour and a quarter long.
Hooray!
Exactly. You see,
Oh, yes, I like it. That sounds good. I'm putting that on my list.
it's really
Right.
good. I don't think you'll be
Yeah.
disappointed because it's got good characters and it's character driven, but really creepy.
Excellent. Speaking of really creepy, we've both been watching a series that has appeared. It is on Amazon Prime, isn't it? Not Shudder.
Yeah, it's like an Amazon original show. Yep.
Yes, the Amazon original show called Them. I think there's a lot going on about a lot of people talking about them at the moment, and we're both at various stages of it. But yeah, you kind of told me about it, and I hadn't watched any of it, and I've like now nearly blitzed the entire season because it's just so insanely crazy. It's so creepy, but not in the way you would expect. Even though it has like a paranormal element to it, doesn't it? It has like ghosts and
Yes.
creepy stuff going on in the house. That isn't the stuff that's creeping me out in it. It's the
Yeah.
racism caused by the white families because this one black family has moved into a white neighborhood. That's the stuff that's really like shocking and horrendous, and you can't stop watching it because you just think it can't, what are they going to do now? It can't get any worse. They're going to go absolutely crazy. Yes, it's very, very good, and I've very nearly finished.
Yeah, it's superb actually, and I think a lot of people will enjoy this if enjoy's the right word.
Yeah.
It's very compelling. Yeah, as I said, it's very easy to watch because there's 10 episodes and the episodes are of different lengths. So a couple of them are just half an hour long, although at the longest they're about 45 minutes. And you're quite right. I mean, the supernatural elements, if anything, are the least frightening things about it because it's about that period in American history, the Great Migration, where a lot of black families moved to the white suburbs. And what we're seeing when you watch it, oops, sorry about that, that's my pen falling off. What we're seeing is a falling off from where? From the sky. What we're watching, if anything, is probably a slightly toned down version of what some of these people went through. But
You can't imagine that though, can you?
it's
I mean, it's hardly toned down, if you ask me.
it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's relentless. The first 5 or 6 episodes are less paranormal based. The paranormal stuff kind of is heightened later on, but it's always there. However, it's so disturbing because you're watching these incredibly believable and obviously real situations of a teenage girl in a classroom being horribly mocked.
Oh, that was awful.
Yeah, absolutely horrifying. And also, just I think some of the most disturbing stuff is the casual racism. What seems to be a very decent sort of non-judgmental white guy in a TV shop, having a nice chat, and then just slipping in something that he didn't need to say, which is incredibly condescending and racist. Things like that. You think, wow, this is across the board. There's one episode which we both discussed, which is episode 5, which goes to a particularly dark place of the kind that you probably almost never get on TV or even in many mainstream films, which I think is an episode which is the most harrowing part of the series. I don't think the show ever kind of does anything as shocking as that. But the whole atmosphere of the entire series is massive dread of what's going to happen next, and you're rooting for this family so much. Um, and yeah, it's astonishing. It's extremely well acted by the cast. I think it's from what I've read, it's a mixture of American, British, and Australian actors. Certainly, Ryan
Mm.
Kwanton is Australian, right?
I don't actually know on that.
I think he
I
is.
always thought he was American, but
I know True Blood had a few Australian actors.
yeah, of
Yeah,
course, because Anna Paquin's Australian, isn't she?
yeah. I mean, you wouldn't know it.
So he could. No, yeah, exactly. Same with him. I mean, I love that he's popped up again. He seemed to have disappeared,
Yeah,
and obviously, I said that he pops up in one of the Creepshow episodes, and he's popped up in this, and he's just so lovely in this. Even though his character is crazy, he's not in it for very long, but you
yeah,
love him. You still love him, don't you?
yeah.
Especially what he
That's
does to
right.
Betty.
Oh, Betty. Oh, God. Yes. I mean, there's such hateful characters in this that
Oh, she
anybody
is
showing
awful.
some signs of humanity, not just the black family who obviously you're rooting for, but a
Yeah.
few of the white people who are not quite as horrible as she is,
Mm.
you're willing them to do something good.
But
So
then with Betty, you kind of get a bit more backstory about her as well, and then kind of realise what a horrendous upbringing she had as well. And you kind of like, I kind of understand why she's a little bit the way she is.
yes, I think so. That's right. Yeah, because it peels back the layers, doesn't it? So
Mm.
the first episode is very much from the family's point of view. So you're like, wow, these people are irredeemably awful, horrible people. But then, yes, you're right. This stuff comes from somewhere, and with her, it very specifically does. So yeah, them is extremely good. It's
Right.
the supernatural parts of it have got shades of earlier films and shows like Poltergeist and The Shining, very
Yeah.
much The Shining actually.
Mm.
Um, there's a character who is, I suppose, a bit like Reverend Kane from the Poltergeist sequels. But yeah, all round, I've got two to go. You've got one to go. Is that right?
Yes, I've got the last episode.
And it's been really well sustained. And I
Yeah.
think it will be, if it already isn't, which I think it is, looking at some of the newspaper articles, it'll be a big talking point for a while.
Yeah, I wonder
And
if they'll do
yeah,
a second series.
well, yeah, the plan is, isn't it? Because it's an anthology series, so this has
Ah,
got
cool.
a title. This series has got its own title, which I've already forgotten. But the plan is to do an American Horror Story style anthology horror series, presumably about the Black experience in America. Um,
Ah, great.
so on the basis of this, it's going to be yeah, great to great to keep on track with.
Mm,
So yeah,
cool. Yeah, it's
nice.
been a good month of watching.
It has, yeah, some really strong stuff coming out and more coming. I think we've got like
Yeah,
stuff that's been hanging around that hasn't come out yet, like the Candyman remake,
yeah,
uh, Quiet Place 2. All these things are hovering on the sidelines.
yeah.
Um, and I think a few horror things that are going to go straight to Netflix and Prime as time goes on. So
Oh, I watched this trailer literally before we started recording of a movie that's coming out. I think it's definitely like straight to streaming DVD. It's called The Zombie King, and it stars Edward Furlong and Corey
oh,
Feldman. And
they're back.
I think it's British as well. But I watched the trailer and oh my god, it doesn't look good. But you got to watch it. It's going to be funny.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? Because Edward Furlong and Corey Feldman have. Well, I suppose the thing is you've got to keep working. So if you get paid, we've all been there. I sometimes think, why is he in this? Well, yeah, you've got to go for whatever's available. Yeah, Edward Furlong's not looked well for some considerable time.
He does. He looks quite pudgy in this. He's put on a little
Yeah,
bit of timber. But Corey Feldman still looks the same. And he's a zombie.
actually he does. Yeah, he hasn't really aged, has he?
No. He like
Corey
hit
Feldman.
20 and like stayed the same ever since.
He's quite
Crazy we could all do that.
entertaining. He's really
Yes.
entertaining in interviews. And having rewatched The Lost Boys, I think it was last year on the big screen before everything closed. That was great, and I thought, oh
Oh,
yeah, I
yes.
miss these days. And he was in so many iconic 80s
Yes.
films. I rewatched Stand By Me last year as well, and I was like, wow,
Oh,
this
love
is
that
such
film.
a great cast of natural child actors. Obviously River Phoenix, but Corey's was really good.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, Gremlins. Oh, nostalgia, sweet nostalgia. Well, that
Oh,
was that was us on the trip down memory lane, and we're going to stay there because, of course, it's now time for something even older, which is our revisit to Elm Street. The seven films made between
Seven.
1984 and 1994. What a fast track that was. Not quite as prolific as the Friday movies, which were, I think, 8 in 8 years or 8 in 9 years. But yeah, we're going to talk about the Nightmare on Elm
Close.
Street movies. Close but no cigar. And so, yeah, this is the main feature. All of you would have seen them. If you've not seen them, it's a bit daft to come and listen to us about to ruin everything about them. But of course, you can turn away now as we dissect the 7 first films in the series. We're not going to talk about the remake because we don't want to depress ourselves.
And we may have mentioned that last time, so
Yeah, indeed.
let's not go over it again.
We're not going to talk about Freddy's Nightmares, the TV series, which was made kind of in between parts 4 and 5, I believe. And I don't think I ever watched all of it. It was shown in the wee small hours of, I think, ITV, independent TV over here. Our local region where we live was Anglia TV, and they would show it at odd times, and you couldn't guarantee it would be on the following week. So it was a little hard to keep track of Freddy's Nightmares, the TV series, but it wasn't that good. I mean, it was an anthology show with Freddy usually as the host rather than actually playing a part in the story. Although there was a good episode that I remember where Freddy's origins were traced. So it showed him before being burned. It showed the trial. And that was probably the first episode of the series. And that was worth watching because it was like, oh, okay. Like a prequel.
Yeah, fill in some blanks.
Yeah. But it was all part of the, I suppose, Freddy saturation, which by that stage in the 80s had happened, which we'll come to, I believe, as we go through the 7 films. So, yeah, it all begins, Sarah, back in 1984. Can you believe it? 1984.
1984. He's only a wee child.
Me too. Actually, me too. Yes, I can actually say that. But
we're actually being true about it now. I was a small person.
You know, the strange thing is when you look at this stuff now and you think, wow, this movie is now as old, in my case, and probably not quite your case, but not that far off, I guess. But this movie is now as old as Hammer, the original Hammer horror films were when I was watching them in the 80s when Nightmare on Elm Street came out. It's kind of mad because they were old films to me then. I loved them, but they were still old films in my head. But now, of course, to today's youth, Nightmare on Elm Street films are old films.
Yeah. Yeah, but they're the ones that we all remember from our childhood and stuff, hiding behind sofas and being absolutely petrified of Freddy's glove and some of the kills and stuff. And yeah, they I wouldn't say they traumatized me, but they fascinated me, and they're ones that have stuck in my head. And we're going to do a little rundown of our favorites, and
for sure
notice that my top 2 are the ones that I remember most fondly from when I was a kid. Other ones I kind of picked up along the way. But these are the 2 that stick in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they're a huge part of that period of VHS horrors, of becoming a horror fan in the 80s. These were massive. I remember the posters really creepy. The original poster, which is the big glove over Nancy asleep in bed and the suburban street underneath, which was, I believe, designed for the UK by Graham Humphreys, who's one of our favourites. As far as poster artists go. So, I mean, the original, you're quite right. The original especially is a genuinely scary film. And Freddy in this one, and I would also say in a couple of the other films that came after, is a genuinely disturbing character. Obviously, you find out in the course of the first one, he was an awful child killer. The courts let him off on a technicality, and he was released despite enormous evidence. So the parents of Elm Street gang together in a vigilante mob and set fire to him. And the cool concept of Wes Craven's script for this 84 movie is that killing him actually made things much worse, because now he's back and he's got superhuman powers. And the other great thing, I think, is a lot of slashers in this period, before and after, including Jason and Michael, seem to have supernatural powers, although not really, because they are just human beings and they've been coming back from the dead a bit. But in Freddy's case, he's got the excuse that he is dead, and he's got this amazing dream power, which is sort of partly maybe an attempt as it made to explain parts of that in Freddy's Dead, which we'll come to later. But so he is essentially unkillable, and he can kill you in a dream, and that means you're dead in real life. So it's such a great concept and a great twist on the slasher films, which by 1984 apart from the Jasons and Michaels, had worn themselves out. The slasher genre was pretty tired by that.
And it plays on kids' like worst things. You know, every kid had a nightmare. You all remember
Yes,
like running to your parents' room and stuff, saying you'd had a bad dream and stuff. So, you know, that kind of like adds the extra twist on the slasherness to it, and kind of adds that extra element of fear, especially for the younger kids watching, when they
it
know
really
they
does.
shouldn't watch, but they do.
It really does, doesn't it? And I think this movie, the first one, and the best of the sequels, I think really capture the weirdness and the kind of terrifying pull of a real nightmare. Like
Yep.
some of the images in the first one, especially like you're being chased by something and you're trying to get up the stairs, but they've turned to mush.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah, and you're sinking into it. And the first scene we see of Freddy, his arms are like twice the length they should be, just scraping down the wall. If that doesn't send chills down your spine, what would?
It really does. Yeah, that's really disturbing, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's it. And that's what made him. I mean, he was different to all the others because most of the other slashers don't talk.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously, even in the first one, he has the occasional wisecrack that's amped up later on. But I think in the first one, his wisecracks are more cruel.
Mm.
He
Yeah, they're
gets
more taunts. Yeah.
they're taunts. Yeah, that's exactly it. He's physically disturbing. He's got the stuff that really disturbs us, like the knives for fingers or the blades for fingers. It's a glove, obviously, but that's
Mm-hmm.
preying on a lot of primal fears that we have. And when we come to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, you'll kind of see the fairy tale element that runs through these movies is quite strong, I think, in the look of Freddy,
Mm-hmm.
especially in Nightmare. But yeah, this sense of reality blurring and all those things that I did find quite disturbing when I was watching this. I wasn't scared by that many horror movies, strangely, when I was younger, but this I was, and it was things like Nancy having a bath and the glove appearing in a really
Yeah.
quite provocative sequence because it appears between her legs and the bath,
Mm-hmm.
which is really disturbing. Um, but it's that kind of fracturing reality of like, yes, when I have a bath later, I will be thinking of exactly that moment when
Yep.
when you were 7 years old or however old you were. Um, it's a really creepy film, I think, even after all these years. The first one, the um, the telephone tongue, I always thought was a really disturbing image.
Yep. And Johnny Depp, his death.
Yeah,
That
let's talk about
that
the
that
deaths.
was
Yeah.
just yeah, very disturbing. Well, there's quite a few in the first one, isn't there?
Mhm.
Tina's the first one to go, and her death is quite disturbing for a first death, isn't it?
It's really disturbing. Yeah, and I think one thing about this film, I think, is the characters are pretty likable, really, especially
Oh,
for an early '80s slasher, where they weren't always. I think they were
sure.
more so than these days, but I think the actress playing Tina, Amanda Weiss,
Hmm.
does a good job in a short amount of time of making you think, oh, she's really funny and
Yeah, she's
likable.
all
I
right.
hope
Yeah,
she
yeah, yeah,
lasts.
yeah.
and and technically you think she will. I mean, you figure it's a slasher film. It's probably going to be a good half an hour of build up before anyone gets horribly killed, but it's very short lived. It's a few minutes, I think,
Yep.
before Tina is, as you said, killed in a particularly vicious and visceral sequence, which
Yep.
seems to go on longer than it does because she's
Yeah.
screaming for a long time. She's
Yeah.
dragged across the ceiling.
And it's in
Uh,
front of someone else as well,
yeah,
in front of her
that's
boyfriend, because yeah, she's invited him over because she doesn't want to sleep on her own anymore because she's having these bad dreams, and yeah, Freddy gets her right in front of his face, and he doesn't understand what's going on.
yeah, yeah. It's still a powerful sequence, I think, and she falls onto the bed, and he gets splashed with her blood, which is a really disturbing moment as well. Um, and after that, especially when you first watch it, there's a sense that all bets are off because this guy's obviously in the nightmare world, and he can kill people in that world, which crosses over into our reality. Um, the following deaths, I think, are all quite memorable. Like Johnny Depp's death, he's a very likable character too, isn't he? There's a
Yeah,
nice, I think, dynamic between him and Nancy, the
yeah,
heroine. Um, he's a bit more jokey, and she's quite serious. I mean, Heather Langenkamp reappears in these movies. She's in three of them, as we'll discuss. But I think she's really good in the first one. I think this is her best performance. What's your
hmm
thoughts on Heather in
yeah,
this one?
absolutely. In this one, she's great. Um, she does kind of she does a good kind of crazy person, because at the end, when she loses Glenn, and I suppose it's the sleep deprivation as well, she does that very well. I like the way that she hides coffee makers around her bedroom and stuff. That's kind of funny. But yeah, she goes nuts and sets like booby traps, and she doesn't come across as like an in-your-face heroine type thing, does she? You know, she's like your kind of girl next door,
Yeah.
that's a little bit cleverer than other people, that kind of figures out what's going on and is trying to explain to people as best she can, but no one's believing her, so she just gets frustrated.
Yeah, I think she's as kind of realistic as a character in this kind of film
Yeah,
can be, really. I mean, like I
yeah,
said, she looks like somebody you might know, unlike a lot of the leads, male and female, in kind of post-Scream horror films, who all look like models.
yeah,
Um, but she also acts like one, and I like the idea. Wes Craven's stuff from actually from Last House on the Left all the way through to things like People Under Stairs, and indeed the Scream films have always been about um, kind of domestic booby traps and very resilient people finding ways to turn their homes into death traps, and that's
yeah,
quite amusing when she has all that set up for Freddy. But it's testament to her toughness as a character. And I think there's some quite nice scenes where she's obviously got this kind of messed up family life with her drunk mum, um, and her very detached John Saxon shaped dad,
mhm,
who's the sheriff or the cop in town. And I suppose that's amped up even more by the fact in this film and this film series, the parents have actually been part of something horrible. The parents are entirely responsible for what she's going through
mhm.
because they killed Freddie, and that made him much worse. And now he's coming after her. So that's all really well played. And yeah, she is really good. And I think Johnny Depp's really good. And I think it's one of those rare slasher films where it's a genuine shame when people you like die off. Um, which is cool. Yeah, his death. I think in the video era, his death was Johnny Depp's. That is very much on that list of. Should we just rewind that and maybe freeze frame it and see how it's
Yeah,
done?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the blood exploding through the bed up to the ceiling. It's just like, how have they managed to do that?
Incredible, and it's still impressive. And the same goes for Tina's death. The practical effects, the rotating sets, all the stuff that they used with a very limited budget, I think holds up really well in this film. And
Yeah,
that astonishing fountain of blood is such a great moment. It's also got that very Wes Craveny sense of humor, like the cops that show up afterwards and said, "Oh, you're not going to need a stretcher, you'll need a mop." I think uh, the best of Wes Craven's films have that dark sense of humor, and also the invention. And this sure is one of the best things I think that he ever did, if not the best. I always thought Hills Have Eyes maybe is his best film, but this is really up there,
yeah, definitely. I would agree with
for
that.
sure.
It's definitely one of my favourite Wes Cravens.
It's just tremendous. Yeah, I mean the only thing, and this isn't Wes Craven's fault. The studio pressured him to change the ending, which is why we now have and have always had the very goofy and rubbish shot of her mum being pulled through the door, or her
Yeah, it always
substitute
seems
mum.
to. Yeah, it always seems a bit disjointed, doesn't it? It's just like, is that was that a dream, or yeah? I'm like still never too sure. Having watched it several
Yeah,
times now, I'm still just like, that's just a bit weird.
yeah, it's really jarring, isn't it? I think the kind of more low key creepiness of the friends being back, but then being trapped inside the car with the Freddy jumper roof. I think that's a better
Mm,
ending. And I think if you cut it there, then you'd be like, oh, right, so she's still stuck in a kind of nightmare loop. Her friends are
mm.
probably really dead still, I guess is the point. But the kind of window shop dummy being pulled through the door is a bit of a mistake. But again, as far as I can remember, it was tacked on by the studio who wanted one of those what was then obligatory shock endings like Jason coming out of
Right.
the lake or Carrie's
Yeah.
hand coming out of the ground.
Yeah.
Um, you couldn't make a horror film in '84, I suppose, without one of those. What's your favorite thing about the first Nightmare on Elm Street, or your favorite moment, or your creepiest image, Sarah?
Um, my favourite moment is definitely seeing Freddy for the first time.
Yay!
Loved it. It's just one of the ones that stick in my mind, and Glenn's death. They're the two things that I remember. Oh, and the bath scene. Like you say, there's so many iconic moments.
Yeah, yeah. The bath scene I always thought was really troubling. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
my favorite. I think every time I've watched it, and especially in the '80s, the thing I thought was the creepiest and that really played on my mind was all of the scenes where Heather or Nancy rather sees I've forgotten her name, and Amanda Weiss's character.
Tina.
Tina. Yeah, every time she sees Tina after she's been killed, being dragged along the floor
Oh,
in a body bag.
yes, in the school. Yeah, that was pretty creepy. And
Yeah,
and of course the song is always a little bit creepy as well.
yeah, absolutely. This
The
has
little
got
kids, the little nursery rhyme type song.
definitely 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Yeah, that was also something that I think made this extra creepy, and again fits into that kind of child fairy tale thing, but
Mm,
genuinely eerie. This has the best score of the series as well. They do use the theme tune, the themes, or the 2 or 3 main themes from this film a lot in the subsequent scores for the sequels. But yeah, I always thought the idea of the heroine being haunted by her dead friend really disturbing.
yeah.
Um, Reminded me a bit. It's more jokey in American Werewolf, but it reminds me a bit of Griffin Dunn coming back as the wisecracking corpse, because there's something quite disturbing and sad, as well as being hilariously funny, about Jack coming back from the
Yeah,
dead, gradually rotting away every time David Norton sees him. Um, yeah, it's a classic.
it
It's
is.
one of Wes Craven's very best films, and you can totally see how this caught on. Really,
Yeah, you knew after that there was going to be several sequels.
I think so. Yeah, it was a huge hit. This was 1984, and like with a lot of these things, Friday the 13th, Halloween as well, these films were cranked out pretty quick to cash in. So Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge came out a year later in 85. So pretty fast turnaround, really, for
Mm,
something that wasn't necessarily expecting a sequel, although I'm sure that was part of the thinking. The first one was so successful it essentially made New Line Cinema a really prominent studio in Hollywood, and by the 2000s they were making things like Lord of the Rings. So New Line Cinema were famously dubbed the house that Freddy built, which is kind of astonishing, really. So the second one's era.
mm,
It's all change.
very
It's all
much so.
changed. It's a few years later, I think, and this time, and what makes this film I think really interesting is this time there's a male lead, which is pretty rare in slasher films, and I suppose the only male lead in this series, from what I
Yeah,
can now
yeah,
think.
you're right there.
Actually,
Yeah.
yes, it's unusual in slashers. They typically had a teenage female lead. This
Hmm.
has Mark Patton as Jesse, who moves into Nancy's old house. So there's some continuity there. There's the obligatory moment where they're like, "Oh, I've just found Nancy's old diary," which will tell us the backstory for anyone who didn't watch the first one.
Yeah, why I'm having these weird dreams.
Yeah. Um, Now, number two had a bad rap for a while, and I think over the years it's kind of increased its reputation. I always liked it. It is unusual. It's fascinating. I think for a mid '80s film, it's Mark Patton was a gay actor in the closet at the time, who has since made a very good documentary called Scream Queen about his horrible experiences in Hollywood at a very homophobic time during the peak of the AIDS epidemic. So it's an interesting film. It's one of, I think, 2 or 3 really strong horror films from the mid '80s, Fright Night and The Hitcher, which have that same kind of undercurrent of a male character, possibly a sense of gay panic, a male character being seduced and stalked, nearly killed by an older man, a
Mm,
vampire in Fright Night, and obviously Rutger Hauer in The Hitcher. This is really interesting. I think this is all about Freddy Krueger trying to literally get inside Mark Patton's body.
mm.
And in case you didn't realize the subtext, there are scenes with gigantic phallic snakes wrapping themselves around his neck and head. There's a shower scene where um, the horrible coach is stripped and towel whipped.
That is my
And
favourite part of the movie.
yes, it's
It's
amazing,
great.
isn't it? This is a genuinely bonkers sequel, and I think that's why it does stand out. And I also think, I don't know how you feel about this, but the opening sequence, I think, again, is in the tradition of the Wes Craven stuff. I think it's a genuinely kind of disorientating nightmare sequence that begins the film on the school bus, um,
Yes.
where Jesse in his own nightmare has a kind of strange dorky haircut in the opening sequence. The rest of the time he obviously has a funky 80s do.
Yeah.
Um, and he's mocked by a couple of girls on the bus, and it's all quite strange. And Robert Englund gets his first appearance, I think, in the series without makeup as the initial driver of the bus. You just get a glimpse of, uh,
Yeah, the back of his head or something.
yeah. And the bus goes off the road, and it's all surreal. It ends like over this fiery pit, and they're kind of just stuck on an individual kind of gigantic stake in the end, just hanging over the edge of the cliff. So, yeah, I think it's got a great start, and I just think this is a fascinating film. About what I presume is intended as a gay leading character who's being bothered by Freddy. Isn't that interested in his girlfriend, really? And yeah, what's your thoughts on Nightmare 2, Sarah? Tell me some stuff.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. They went down a strange route, I think, of like changing it completely. After the success of the first one, you think they'd probably stick with Nancy and that kind of stuff because she survived. You think you'd stick with that, but
Mm.
no, they go down a different route, and she's moved out, and yeah, there's like Jessie is in. Yeah, I was taken aback a little bit by the opening dream sequence. They open everything on a dream sequence, but I thought this one was a little bit weird. For some reason, it kind of reminds me of Beetlejuice when the couple go outside the house for the first time. I don't know why it reminds me of that, because obviously it was way before Beetlejuice was, and it's not quite as I don't know, claymation as it is in Beetlejuice, but for some reason it reminded me of that. I think it probably definitely needed it though, because I feel like it's a bit tamer
Yeah.
than the others. It's more about his kind of mental state than it is about crazy kills and stuff. Although, they do have the amazing gym kill where the coach is attacked by gym equipment and then strung up and whipped to death by towels, which is pretty awesome. But there isn't a lot else in the way of kills in it, is there? But there is some really creepy moments.
I think
um
so. Yeah, I really think so.
Going on later on in the film, after, I mean, there's a whole sequence at a pool party that Jesse's girlfriend Lisa kind of puts on, and Jesse ends up like morphing into Freddy at the party, and like the swimming pool's boiling, and he's
Yeah.
attacking everyone. That's kind of crazy, but there isn't an awful lot of blood or kills or anything. It's just a lot of terrorizing, really, isn't it? And then Lisa goes back to the warehouse to find Freddy and have this standoff, and there's those two Rottweilers outside the building with children's faces.
Hmm. Yeah,
That
that's
is
genuinely
creepy.
strange.
It's really creepy.
Yeah, yeah. The finale is really strange. Yeah, I was kind of keeping track of the time watching this, and the first hour really only has, as far as kills goes, it only has the
That's the
Coach
one.
Schneider
Yeah.
memorable shower scene. I mean, how many slasher films have a guy killed in a shower at this time? It's pretty rare.
Yeah, not
Um,
many.
so it's interesting. But then again, not many slasher movies have a kind of sequence in an S&M bar where the producer of the film is dressed up as the bartender in makeup and with like one of those spiked sleeves. um, so yeah, I mean, I really like the build up. I mean, on a kind of 80s nostalgia note, I really like the sequence where Jesse's just tidying up his room and he's clicking his fingers, and there's a lot of strange
Dancing
shots of his butt.
around. Yeah.
He dons the shades, he puts his tape on. The song is
Yeah.
"Touch Me All Night Long" or something like that, and he's doing some weird, embarrassing things, and he gets caught in the middle of it. Um, so I like that. He's got a Simple Minds poster on his wall, so I really like Jesse. So he's a, and he's. I mean, it's a strange film in that sense, but I think Mark Patton's really good.
Hmm.
I think he's a genuinely sympathetic character again, and I think it's just refreshing that he's the star of this. I quite like the idea that as Jesse gets deeper into this thing with Freddy, and Freddy wants his body, doesn't he? I mean, he
Yeah.
comes down and says it. You've got the body, I've got the brains. Again, you
Mm.
can read into that whatever you like. But I like the fact that as it gets worse and deeper, the house is heating up. I like all the scenes of like the
Yeah.
budgie going apeshit
Yeah.
before it
And his
explodes.
and his parents, kind of weird passive aggressive thing going on.
What the hell's with them?
Yeah.
He gets blamed for it. He even gets blamed for the budgie exploding. Oh, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, they think he's on heroin or something.
Yeah, so it is weird, and I quite like that as well. I think there's a nice thing in this film because the films are a really great example of why these films appeal to teenagers at the time, because in this case the parents are really the bad guys, as we said before about part one. They created Freddy
Hmm.
in his undead state by burning him alive,
Hmm.
and indeed the parents generally in Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and 2 are horrible. I mean,
Yeah, and they
Nancy's
don't want to
mum's a wreck.
believe. They
Yeah,
don't want to believe anything like that, and yeah, that they're just that their kids are on drugs.
exactly. So I think it's a really good insight into typical 80s American parents, but probably parents everywhere. And I think that's particularly impressive here, especially if you take the subtext at hand and that, Jesse's wanting to come out. So he's very good. I like the build up. I'm not so sure about, I mean, the backstory stuff, the idea of going back to Freddy's old workplace.
Yeah.
Where he apparently took the kids before. I get that as a sequel, its job is to fill in some gaps, and also fill in some time, I suppose. But you're right, it does have some creepy moments. The creepiest moment in the build-up I always thought was the sequence where Jesse's really losing it, and he wakes his little sister up in the night, and he tucks her in, but you see that one of his hands has got the Freddy glove on it. I always thought that's a really the threat of violence in that sequence is really impressive. But one of the reasons I like this film is, apart from maybe the very end of it, which is not that great, is the pool party sequence you mentioned, which has got just the best stuff in it. The last half an hour of this, I think, is great. I mean, I really do.
I love the boiling swimming pool. That's cool.
The boiling swimming pool's great.
And I think some of the guys want to try and like calm Freddy down and kind of approach him, don't they? And get thrown into the barbecue.
Calm down, man. Yeah, there's that. I mean, the movie is clearly built around this big set piece, which annoyed people for a long time because it breaks the rules established in the first one, in the fact that Freddy crosses over into the real world. Obviously, all those kids aren't dreaming, but he's crossed over into the reality of the pool party, which doesn't really make sense on the series' own terms. But then again, this is a movie about someone that kills people in a dream, so does it need to make sense?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, it gets worse as it goes on, doesn't it?
Oh God, yeah.
So if you sit and think about it, part 2 is, that could definitely happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is based on true events. But yeah, I like this stuff. I mean, I love the sequence with Jesse and Lisa, which is this weird love scene where he gets one of those typical 80s horror extendo tongues popping out of his mouth. And ultimately, he decides that rather than spend time with her, he'd rather go and see his hunky friend Grady. And to tell him that somebody's trying to get inside his body, and he says, yeah, she's female, I'm waiting for you, and you want to sleep with me, which I think is a really well played sequence. But also I do think the makeup effects and the transformation sequence, like where the blades grow from his fingers and his arm splits open, are really well done, where Freddy is reborn kind of painfully through
bursting through his chest and stuff.
Yeah, I really like that stuff, and I think it's played well. I think the effects are great. I think the screaming panic at the pool party is good, even if maybe that sequence only exists for what was obviously going to be the trailer shot of Freddy saying "You're all my children now" in front of a screaming crowd. I think the only major downside, is the ending, which has got as you said, the kind of leftover dog from Invasion of the Body Snatchers with a human face, a weird kind of cat monster. Is that what it is? It's a dog. There's a dog and a cat, right? Is there a cat monster as well? I seem to remember something else. A giant rat.
Yeah, maybe.
There's a meltdown, a Freddy meltdown, which is quite good, but the kind of the cliche of the love saving the day, especially Lisa's love. I mean, Lisa's quite a well-played character, I think, but I don't think they're really a couple that's going to make it somehow.
I
think that's a bit lame.
You don't get invested in them. You don't see it.
No, not at all. I think it would have been an amazing and bold thing if it was Grady and Jesse together at the end, and that's the true love story. Obviously, Grady got killed, but I think that's the real love story in this. However, I don't buy the love conquers all ending. I think that's the worst part of the film. And the ending is very much that 80s thing of we need a shock ending, so let's go back to the bus.
We'll go back to the school bus dream at the beginning,
And somebody literally says it's okay, it's all over, before obviously it's not. So it does fall down at the end, but actually I'm really on board with part 2. I think it's a cracking film. It holds up better than I thought it would, and I think a big part of that is how good Mark Patton is in the film. And also they do a quite nice job, apart from the pool party, which is quite short anyway. They do a quite nice job of keeping Freddy in the shadows. He's still a sinister character. He doesn't say an awful lot.
No.
But what he does is quite disturbing and threatening. So it's still keeping the kind of mood of the Wes Craven film, even if it changes a few things. I mean, what's your views generally on it in terms of the overall picture?
I mean, I would agree with that. I was never a massive fan of this one, but it holds up better than some of the later ones for sure. And if it didn't have like its few kills and the weird freaky Rottweilers, I would probably be less keen on it. But they like to kind of at least try and keep it a bit entertaining, and the pool party is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's a good set piece, isn't it?
Yeah. It's definitely not as bad as some of the others.
No, but there aren't many scenes in these films where where Freddy takes on a massive group of people at the same time, is there? I think it's
No,
the
there
only
isn't.
one. Um, so pretty ambitious. But yeah, so Freddy's Revenge, despite not being particularly well liked, even by fans at the time, those bastards, was obviously a big hit. And now Freddy is really starting to cross over into the big time. I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, cue theme tune by Dokken, which is fabulous, actually, was a massive hit. This and part 3 is really where the box office was huge and Freddy became a household name, and then they were cranking them out really fast after this one, including the TV series. So dear old Robert Englund was hard at work, and he is great, isn't he? I mean, it's kind of one of the few horror stars that we had coming out of the 80s, really. Old Robert Englund.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. You know, he was Freddy Krueger through and through. In like Friday the 13th and stuff, you had several Jasons, didn't you? Until Kane Hodder came along. But you know, Freddy Krueger is Robert Englund's baby, and you can't imagine anyone else playing him. And you don't have to in these movies because he's always there.
Absolutely, yeah. And I always thought of Robert Englund as being maybe the nearest we have to someone like Vincent Price.
Sure.
You know, very intelligent man, obviously in real life, very articulate, and playing this pretty articulate character, actually, this monster that happens to take great pleasure in his sadistic stuff. And I think it's great. Tell me about Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, 1987, Sarah.
Oh, yes, I will. Okay. So we are back with some more kids. It's kind of gone back along the lines of the original because we have Nancy back, but she's been away for a few years. She's gone and studied and been a kind of, I don't know, what is she, like a therapist or counsellor or something now?
Yeah, they do call her something, don't they? Yeah, she is.
I can't actually remember what it is. But yes, she ends up at a special facility. Is it back in Springwood? I'm not entirely sure where it's set, but
yeah, I'm not sure.
Awkward. Should have done my research a little bit better. Honestly, I watched it. I promise, I did. Yeah, it kind of starts off with a bunch of kids that are all having the same problems that Nancy was. You know, they're not sleeping because they're haunted by this character who none of them really want to say, but they all kind of know that they're having a dream about the same person. We start off with the main gal, and it is played by brain fart, Patricia Arquette. She plays Kristen, who we see like straight away. She's waiting up for her mum to come back from a night out, and she's kind of trying to keep herself awake with coffee and all sorts, but she's making this model of a stick house, which turns out to be 1428 Elm Street, and she kind of then falls asleep, ends up asleep, and has a crazy dream where Freddy appears and she comes out with a cut wrist, or she ends up almost slashing her wrists. Her mum thinks she's killing herself, so she sends her to this mental facility for other young kids, and they find loads of other kids that are having the same kind of issues as she is. There's two doctors kind of at heads with each other, isn't there? There's kind of nice Mr. Doctor who wants to go down the nice route, and then we have a female doctor who's a little bit harsher, more for sedation and getting them to go to sleep, whereas he wants to kind of go through more therapeutic ways to find out why they're not sleeping, which is where they then bring in Nancy to come along to help. And it's crazy. Yeah, you meet up with a bunch of other new kids who are all, again, like in the first one, they are all really good characters, aren't they?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, they are, and this is the strength, I think, of, well, actually, the first 4 films, I would say, it's really good casting. I mean, in this case, the film has pretty impressive casting because there's some future stars in there. You've got Patricia Arquette. This is maybe her first film, certainly a very early one. Became a huge star just a few years later in things like True Romance. Lawrence Fishburne as the really likable. He's got great screen presence in this.
He does, and I like how he's in the credits and stuff. He's Larry Fishburne.
Yeah, he's Larry in Death Wish 2, I think. It's Death Wish 2. He's one of those films as a punk. Yeah, you know, one of those bad guys.
When he gets into his more serious roles, he becomes Lawrence.
He's great. I mean, you can see why he became a star. The charisma that he's got in this film is great. Priscilla Pointer, Carrie's friend's mum in Carrie, She's the stern kind of senior one that's very
Oh,
disapproving of the group therapy, isn't she? So it's an amazing cast. Even Jennifer, I mean, the kids, the teenagers, which we can talk about, I think are a really good bunch. And my only kind of criticism of this film is that I'd rather be spending more time with the teenagers than the quite boring, nice but dull doctor goes out on dates with Nancy and has some Thai
yeah.
food.
Yeah, there
Um,
is a weird thing going on there. They don't really do the romance thing very well in the Nightmare movies, do they? It's like they meet each other and then you're like, wait, hang on a minute, are they now supposed to be a couple?
well,
You
they
kind
never,
of get this kind of
yeah,
undertone, but you never really know.
it never pans out, does it? And there's a sense that the script doesn't really care, but it's filling in time.
Yeah.
However, it does have these really good characters. I mean, the first one to go, and he goes
Oh, I
in the most
love him. Oh,
spectacular way.
really
Bradley
scary.
Gregg. He's a
Yes,
great. Yeah, my
love
sister
him.
had a big crush on him back in the day. I'm saying my sister, of course, I mean me. But he was in a
You and
few
your sister.
80s things. Together we shared fan club invites.
Yep.
He was in a few 80s things. He's in, there's probably a more famous one, but I know he's in Class of 1999, which was a cool little action film that came out after this. But yeah, Bradley Gregg's really charismatic as well. And a bit like with Tina, I think the movie is smart enough to know that, it will shock people more if you make a character really likable really quickly and then kill him off, in the first 15 minutes or so. Um, but I also like the other ones that don't have a huge amount of time on screen but are really likable, like I think it's Penelope Milford that plays the self-harming girl that wants to be a big TV star,
Yes.
and she's really
There's
lovable.
there's some big deaths in this. It goes
This is
back to,
spectacular.
yeah, the good formula of just let's introduce this person, we like them, and let's watch them die in a really horrible way. In a
That's
kind of
right.
way of, like with the girl, like with Jennifer, who gets her head smashed into the TVU. She wants
Oh
to be an
yeah.
actress, playing on things that they want to be.
That's right. Yeah, this is the set piece death era now. I mean, the first Nightmare on Elm Street does this in a way. It's got the two
Mm,
very memorable ones, Johnny Depp and Amanda Weiss. But this is basically saying Freddy's arrived. We've got more money on the budget this time. You can tell that because it's really impressively visually. But yeah, the deaths are every few minutes and they are
yeah,
spectacular. I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah. The
first one,
marionette, yeah,
oh,
marionette
it's the
puppet is
best.
really
It's
creepy.
really disturbing. Yeah, it's a great visual. I mean, it's using stop motion. It's using very, very good practical effects. It really held up when I rewatched this last week.
Mhm.
And Blu-ray, of course, can expose deficiencies in makeup effects, or it can age them because of the resolution is obviously higher. But in this case, it doesn't. I mean, it's still really nasty to see the holes in his feet and his veins being
Mm,
yanked out and used as puppet strings. That's a disturbing detail, I think. And Freddy is the godlike puppet master in the sky.
yeah.
Um, and that's really a shocking moment. And obviously his friends are watching. But yeah, the girl watching TV. And I think, again, you can see that Freddy's truly arrived because they got Dick Cavett and Zsa Zsa Gabor to make a guest appearance where the
Yes.
host says, who gives a fuck what you think to Zsa Zsa Gabor, which is
Yeah.
great. He's turned into Freddy. Um, yeah, that's an amazing moment, isn't it? Welcome to prime time is possibly Freddy's best ever line
Yeah.
uh, in these movies. My favorite thing about that death in particular, the TV death, is that despite the obvious bizarreness of it, the authorities in the hospital still believe this is another suicide. Hey,
Yeah. Yeah. How would that
how?
happen?
It's yeah, which I presume was meant in kind of dark humor sense, but it does seem a bit of a stretch that she killed herself in the most
Yeah, in
elaborate
that
way
way.
anyone's ever
Yeah.
done. But yeah, the deaths are incredible. They're a great example of mechanical effects. And yeah, no, I think almost everything in this works. I think we've said that the kind of weird tentative romance between the two leads, Heather and the Doctor, played by Craig Wasson, is just filler, really.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And luckily, they don't really go into too much detail about it
no, I
because
think it,
there is
it doesn't hold it up too much.
no, because there is a lot going on in this one, really, because it kind of then
Busy.
splits into two, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's
Um,
so much going on.
yeah, you have because Craig Wesson as Neil is haunted by a white nun,
Yes,
which we
yeah.
haven't mentioned. He sees her and is talking to her, and she's giving him like cryptic messages about Freddy. When he starts to learn more about Freddy, she lets on that his mother was raped by mental patients and dubs him the bastard son of 100 maniacs. There's a bit to Freddy that you didn't know beforehand, and the only way to get rid of him is to find his remains and bury them on hallowed
The
ground.
new mythology. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
Isn't
then you
it?
have, sorry,
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, isn't it great that it's not enough that Freddy was an awful child murderer, but that his mum was raped by 100 maniacs?
by 100 maniacs. Yeah,
Not just one.
exactly. No,
100.
100 maniacs. Squeeze that in there. Yeah, it is good. Yeah, it's crazy. The
It's
stories that they come up with along the lines, it even gets sillier than that in points, doesn't it?
Well, it's
But
so busy, isn't it? And I think what you've got here, when you look at the credits, you realise that this is, and it does show, but I think it shows in a way that's good rather than bad. It's four writers that basically did the script.
ah,
It's Wes Craven. Wes Craven. This is the only one where he came back and had involvement in the sequel until New Nightmare at the very end.
right.
Bruce Wagner, a very young Frank Darabont, co-wrote it,
Uh-huh.
and Chuck Russell, the director, who also did quite well later on with things like The Mask and the Blob remake. But yeah, it's definitely the work of four writers, because you can see how maybe one was involved with, oh, I'll be in charge of
With
the
that
dream
half,
powers.
yeah, yes,
Um,
exactly. There's another element to it. They all get into a mass group hypnotism and get into
yes,
the same dream, and they all have magical powers.
which in a way is perfect as well, isn't it? I mean, I think as far as this movie being obviously targeted at a teenage audience in the 80s, it's covering a lot of ground. It's covering real life stuff. Like,
Mm,
I think it was quite controversial at the time, because this movie does talk about the problem in America of teen suicides and
yeah,
of self-harming. And it doesn't trivialize it, I don't think. I think it's very
no,
sympathetic to the teenagers and unsympathetic to the mum and dads. Like, Kristen's character, Patricia Arquette's character's mum, is this awful. She's obviously from a wealthy background, but her mum is just basically spending loads of dollars on shrinks that haven't helped at all.
hmm hmm
That's the parents. This is very much on the side of the kids, but it's also doing this fantasy stuff. I'm sure as much as we've all had nightmares, we've all had this kind of idea of being a superhero in a dream, or
hmm
of
hmm
Kincaid is super strong. Kincaid is a fun character. He can bend
yeah,
chairs and shit. Patricia Arquette can do massive somersaults and pull people into her dream. So that's
yep,
a gift. I think when it comes to the punk character, who I really like, played by Jennifer Rubin, her ability seems to be to just kind of have flick knives and be a bit harder. Is that the
yeah,
gist?
yeah. I think that's what that is. I love Will,
Will, the
the
Wizard
geeky guy, the
Master.
wizard master. Yes.
And this was the era of Dungeons and Dragons and all that stuff. So that's, again, it's perfectly timed. Yeah, Will is great, isn't it? Again, it's a shame when he dies. He dies so quickly when he's first Wizard Master in full. It's callously.
Yeah. You think he's a wizard master, he wouldn't actually be able to die, but he does.
He kind of chucks a thing at Freddy, doesn't he? And it comes right back at him or something. I can't remember, but he
Yeah.
gives it a go. um, and
Oh, and you have
Joey,
Joey. Yes.
yes, Joey is mute, isn't he?
Yeah, he
Um,
doesn't talk at all.
so he's been traumatized by reasons that I don't think we ever find out
Nope.
into being mute. But again, there's a sympathetic portrait of him, and in both the films that he's in, he's off on fantasies about sexy nurses and stuff.
Yeah.
Where again we have the stretchy tongue and Freddy's
Yep.
inevitable tongue-tied one-liner. Yeah, Joey's really good. I mean, it's a very good cast, and I think it's such a busy film that you don't get to spend that much time with them, but the actors are so good you feel like you kind of know them anyway.
Mm.
I think is the great trick to this. I think this movie is really good. I think it still works on a kind of creepy horror level. I think some of the nightmare visuals are really good in this, like the
Yep.
creepy tricycle that melts down, the hog roast coming to life, Freddy as a giant snake.
Yep.
Oh, which is again a great big practical effect that these days they do with CGI, but back then, it was all really there on the set. I think the effects were amped up to 11 on this one for sure.
Sure.
But yeah, it's terrific. I think this really holds up. And as you said, the kind of elaborate, it kind of plays on classic horror, I suppose. The elaborate way that Freddy can only be killed involves the stuff you'd normally find in Gothic horror. You'd find in
Yeah.
Dracula. So
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
to get some holy water, and they have
Yep.
to,
And a cross.
yeah. So I quite like that. I think that's we're going. It's a very modern horror film for the time, but we're going back to traditional, old-fashioned Universal horror and Bram Stoker
Yeah.
for the only way you can get rid of the monster.
I love the skeleton battle in the car,
Yes,
the salvage yard.
brilliant. Another throwback to stop motion
Yep.
animation from the Jason and the Argonauts. Yeah, great. So that's fantastic. Yeah, I think it's great. I think the weaknesses are that Heather Langenkamp isn't that interesting as
No.
grown up Nancy, and that's, I think, maybe partly due to the way it's written as much as her, but she's clearly miscast in the kind of role that she's now playing. Even though it is Nancy, it's obviously a few years on, and it doesn't quite seem to work somehow, which is a bit of a shame. But otherwise, it's got Dokken. It's got Robert Englund truly comfortable in the role and giving it large, but not too large. It's got the first appearance of the soul chest, the chest of souls, where his victims end up.
Yep.
And yeah, it's good fun, and you don't begrudge the fact that unusually, a few of the leads still survive, like Kincaid, Joey.
Yeah, that's the thing. It kind of moves on to the next chapter, doesn't it? Because unfortunately, sadly, we lose Nancy in this one.
Yep, she does. She buys
by
the
the
farm.
end, yeah, she's out here, and then it's kind of like passed on to the next generation of Elm Street kids, I guess. And yeah, Kincaid, Joey, and Kristen all make it through to the next part.
They sure do. Yeah. So good old Nightmare 3, I would say. And we did mention Dokken, but the Dokken song is great, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a good one. 3 is a good one.
3 is a great one, yeah. And I think this is also the time where you do see like more big bands at the time that form part of the soundtrack, because the movies are getting really popular. The next one, part 4, has a whole bunch of them. It's got Sinead O'Connor on the soundtrack, Billy Idol, Blondie, Divinyls, Go West. Remember Go West?
Yeah.
And unfortunately the Fat Boys as well, but there you go. Yeah, so just a year later, after Dream Warriors became such a massive success, we have Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master, which is cracking too, actually, in its own way. This does have some good continuity, whereas Part 2 was all new bunch. This carries over the survivors of the third part. Patricia Arquette's gone on to other ventures, so the character of Kristen is now played by Tuesday Knight, which is a hilarious name.
I love her name. It's the best.
It's great, isn't it?
I wonder if she's got sisters.
Like Wednesday night,
Thursday night, Saturday night. Saturday night's got to be like the party girl of the group.
Oh, Saturday night would be off the chain. Sunday night would be quite sedate and kind of plain. Yeah. Monday, nobody would really get on with Monday.
No. No one wants to talk to Monday.
Nah, yeah, go back. Yeah, I'd love to know what her middle name is. Yeah, Tuesday night. She's great. Shamefully, I can't. It's Rodney Eastman that plays Joey. I can't remember the name of the guy that plays Kincaid.
Ken.
Oh, Ken Sago.
Sagos, if that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah. And this one, I mean, this one still has an awful lot going on. It obviously brings back those characters, so it's got to kind of do the thing of cleaning house first of all and essentially polish them off. And at the same time, it's introducing a whole bunch of new ones. It's got to find a way of getting Freddy back. There's all sorts of things going on. The FX credits are amazing. Like in the opening titles, there's such a big list of makeup effects people, including huge ones like Screaming Mad George, who tends to do the most surreal stuff, and Steve Johnson. It's directed by Rennie Harlin, who became a huge Hollywood director with Die Hard 2 and a whole bunch of blockbusters in the 90s. And you can tell it's a really good looking kind of stylish movie with big action scenes. It's shot and cut like a music video a lot of the time. And yeah, we've got Kristen. She's got a boyfriend played by Andros Jones, who's the brother of the new character Alice, Lisa Wilcox.
I love Rick. He's really sweet. He's a really nice boyfriend, isn't he?
I think Rick's very much. I presume they wanted a kind of a character equivalent to Johnny Depp in the first one, and he really does that well. Whatever happened to him, Andros Jones? I don't
know.
Yeah, I have to check that out. But he's very good, and again, I think it goes a bit wrong after this one. But I think the first 4 are really well cast movies. I think they had a knack for finding very good young actors, and many of them obviously went on to do other things. So yeah, the old characters get polished off pretty quickly, don't they? And
Yeah.
we must talk about, first of all, with the Dream Master, the way in which Freddy is resurrected.
Oh yes, yes, I love it. I love it because Kincaid can. Well, his dog seems to be able to follow him into his dreams as well now, doesn't he? Yeah, it's like they've all left the institute and they're all, funnily enough, all back at school together. So
Somehow.
they've all been cured. Joey's talking again.
Yes. I
He's
guess
not.
the
He's no
institute
longer
closed
mute.
down. I don't know. What happened to
Yeah,
the institute? They were like,
yeah,
oh, it's too many deaths.
yeah. They just release them and just let them go back to school. But yes, Kincaid is home and he's got his dog, and his dog is really cool, and his dog is called Jason, which I love.
Jason.
I love the
Yeah.
fact that they called the dog Jason.
And
But
it's
yeah,
Jason that revives Freddy, which is a great
yeah,
death.
it's great, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Kincaid kind of has a dream, and his dog goes into it with him, and he's locked in the boot of a car. And when he gets out of the car, he's in the same abandoned car lot that they buried Freddy in, and Jason is digging him up. And yeah, he just has this crazy chase around the car lot, doesn't he? Until, unfortunately, Kincaid eventually dies.
Yes.
But Joey's death is the one that gets me every time. That's one that I vividly remember when I was a kid of being absolutely just like, oh my god, I can't believe that happened. When Joey gets pulled into his waterbed, it's not particularly gruesome or anything. It's just the
No.
fact that he's pulled into a waterbed and like drowns in his waterbed, and it's when his mum pulls the covers back and finds him in the mattress.
Yeah, that's disturbing.
Oh,
Yeah.
for some reason, that's always stuck in my head. I never knew. I've always had a problem of knowing which deaths were from which sequel.
Yeah.
But that one has always stuck in my mind. And as soon as I saw that bit, I was like, oh, yes, I knew that bit. It's just stuck in my head so long, all these years.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's really well done as well. I'm not quite sure how they actually did the whole visual of the girl underneath in the waterbed and
Yeah.
him. It's really impressive. Um, it's a very 80s sequence, isn't it? He's listening to MTV and he's reading
Yeah.
the Rolling Stone magazine
And
on a waterbed.
yeah. Yeah, it's
An
really
80s
80s.
pin-up girl come to life. Uh, Freddie's wisecrack, how's this for a wet dream? Feels like, you can imagine the person that came up with that round in a meeting. You're like, right, I've got it. How's this for a wet dream? Perfect. You've got the job, Bob.
Yep.
Brilliant. I think it does a good job of mixing grim visuals like, a parent discovering their dead child in that scenario with the silly stuff like the flaming dog piss that brings Freddie back.
Yeah.
And I think it does a good job of carrying over some themes from the series, like Alice is the new character and she has a true shitbag alcoholic dad.
Mm-hmm.
Although he is kind of reformed in the next one, he's
Yeah.
he's another effectively absentee parent, and this series seems to kind of have a lot of those. I quite like Alice. I mean, I don't know how you feel about Alice in this film, at least. I think she's quite a
Mm-hmm.
likable character.
Yeah.
She has her own power, so it carries on the idea that the characters have their own dream powers. She's the dream master, as you come to find out in the film. But she's quite a fun, kind of shy character at first. She's a bit crap. She's trying to learn fighting from her hot brother.
Mm-hmm.
And she's prone to kind of daydreams. I think Debbie's really a good character with the massive perm.
Yeah.
Probably the best perm of the series. Definitely better than Heather's rubbish perm from 3.
Yeah.
She's the exercise obsessed one, the kind of 80s aerobics obsessed person. And Alice's brother is the one that's fixated on nunchucks and such, which again feels like a very 80s trope for a movie. But they're a good bunch of characters, I think.
Yes, definitely. And you have Sheila as well, the
Oh, yeah.
quiet young girl that has asthma. Her death is a classic Freddy.
Yeah, she's again in a small amount of time. She seems to do quite a lot with that character. Yeah, that's quite a good and disturbing character. This is I think as you go on, you kind of get to see Freddy in different guises, and I always remember in this one, this is where he's in drag as or Robert in the drag as the school nurse, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, that's disturbing.
strange. She looks kind of familiar.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. You are at first glance, you're like, this is something quite a little bit wrong here.
kind of pretty, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Hello.
great.
Oh, wait.
He's clearly loving this. I mean, he's getting obviously much more to do in these later films, which isn't always a good thing, but I think in this one it works really well, and he's clearly having a great time. there's lots of gags. I mean, there's lots of incidental gags, like Alice works at a diner called the Crave Inn, which I think is quite good. And it's all quite breezy. It goes by quite quickly. A few people are back, like Kirsten's or Kristen's. Is she Kirsten or Kristen? I can never remember.
Kristen.
Kristen's awful mum is back briefly. Um, Although there's a horrible moment there where she obviously finds her daughter burning to death in the bedroom, which I think is quite a horrifying moment. But this is the one where Freddy has crossed over into being the kind of the bogeyman you love to hate kind of poster child for, or poster guy for this series, with scenes like the beach sequence where he's got shades on and his gloves, the shark fin. And of course, an endless amount of one-liners. Pretty much every scene he's in, every death has a big one-liner.
Has something, yep.
Some I think are specifically related to 80s stuff. Like I'm sure "Why Don't You Reach Out and Touch Someone" was some advert from the 80s. Is that right? It rings a bell.
So. Yep.
If the food won't kill you, the service will. All that stuff is very much about kind of the crowd-pleasing things, and I think it works in this one. Yeah, I mean, what's your highlights of part 4?
My highlights is definitely the waterbed scene, and then
Yes.
and then Debbie's death as well, when he gets turned into a cockroach. That was quite disturbing for me as a young un as well.
It's a great bit of effect, isn't it? The Roach Motel.
Yeah, it's great.
It's actually really horrific. I'd forgotten, like the moment where her elbows get ripped by the weights that he's forcing on her. It's possibly the most gruesome thing in the whole series.
Yeah, it definitely makes you wince for sure. For sure. And then it goes a little bit crazy because obviously Alice is trying to get to Debbie, and she's with her crush Dan, isn't she? And she has this strange dream sequence before she leaves the house of her as an older woman still working in the diner and stuff, and then she ends up going to the cinema and gets pulled into the cinema, and you're never entirely sure when she actually stops dreaming, but then Freddy appears again, and so you're like, oh, so she must be dreaming. So she then wakes up in her bed and then has to get out the house again, which you think she's already done, and she's supposed to be meeting Dan, and like ends up in this dream sequence where her and Dan are just going round and round in a loop so Freddy can go and get Debbie.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's one of the strongest bits. I think that really captures the randomness of nightmares, of being trapped, of going round in circles. I suppose it's built around the personal nightmare of looking at your future and thinking, oh shit, I'm still in that same job in a crappy diner, the Crave Inn, the joke. So I think I like that loop. I think that's really disorientating, and I think that's it, the sense of getting nowhere fast, which is a big part of nightmares. That's quite clever. And I like that the cinema is showing Reefer Madness as well, the classic don't do drugs film.
Yep.
I think it's pretty cool. They're doing some cool stuff in this film. There's the image of the pizza with the human meatballs. That's quite good.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Freddy as a surgeon. There's a whole lot of stuff. I always see Alice as a kind of preview of things to come. There's a tooling up montage which every 80s film has to have. Set to some empowering anthem.
Yeah, she turns into a bit of a kind of like warrior princess or something, because she takes something from all her friends and stuff that died. She'll take something to remember them by, because she has a mirror at the beginning of the movie. She has a mirror full of that. She's basically covered with loads of pictures of her and her friends, because she doesn't want to just see herself, she wants to see her friends. And as they go, she kind of pulls the pictures off and really shows more of the mirror, which then makes her like kind of turn into like crazy tooled up woman to go and fight Freddy. And she takes her brother's like ninja like headband type thing, and then becomes a master of the nunchucks and stuff like that.
That's great. I think that's cool. I think that's as corny as I think it worked. I like the mirror thing, and I like the idea of Alice as a kind of preview of Buffy. She's essentially an early version of Buffy, complete with the martial arts gift that she's inherited from him. I think it works. I think Lisa Wilcox is quite good in this one. So that's quite cool. I think this has one of the best Freddy, probably the best Freddy death. It's a great piece of effect as well. The idea of his soul chest, or the souls from his chest ripping him apart, is probably the most definitive death they came up with for Freddy, and they kind of
Hmm.
repeat it a bit later on in other films. But yeah, I think this holds up really well. It's never scary. I don't think it's disturbing at times. It's got some horrific visuals like the elbow thing
Yeah,
and the water bed, but it's not scary like the first one. But it is also, I think, really good as a fun kind of popcorn horror movie, and I
very
think it
fun.
holds up.
A lot bigger. I do have one slight query though. You know, we're going back to like the kids chanting the rhyme and stuff at the beginning
Yeah.
in the first one. I feel like as the sequels go, the kids that are actually doing that are getting younger. They seem to be like in the first one, they're kind of like, I don't know what, 8 or 9, and then they seem to like be getting younger and younger. And in this one, they look like they're about 5.
Yeah, and that does that start changing in yeah, because in three it's a little girl on the tricycle, isn't
Yeah,
it?
like
That
really
carries
little.
over. Yeah, I suppose it's yeah, that's true. I suppose it's quite a cool reminder that because obviously as the movies got jokier, people were forgetting that Freddy was a child murderer. It's quite a
Yeah,
good, creepy reminder that this is where it came from. Um, and that's it's kind of still overlooked in the next films, although I think they do a good job of reminding you in Freddy versus Jason later on
yeah.
that actually, as fun as he seems, this guy had a few issues. Um, you know, but yeah, good old part four rather. Jolly good show. So, are we ready for the next one?
Yes. Well, are
Uh,
we?
so part four was a huge hit, and again on video back in the day, it seemed like the best thing. To rent part four in the late 80s, you're
Yeah,
like,
it really was.
fantastic, can't wait for the next one. And that was how it was. I totally get how these films did so well. Um, Nightmare 5 is where it does go a bit wrong. I mean, Nightmare 5, in its defense, like some of the others, was rushed out because 4 was so big. So this came out a year later, while Robert Englund was also making the TV series as well. So a kind of, I guess, a punishing schedule all around. This was directed by Stephen Hopkins, who later on did things like Predator 2. So he had a blockbuster career ahead of him. And it's quite well shot. It's quite a good looking film, I guess. There's the
Hmm.
odd arty bit. There's a weird title sequence that goes on forever with some kind of arty looking shagging and a shower scene, which is a bit boring. Um, but part five, I think, is perhaps where it just goes very badly wrong.
Mm.
It starts off, or quite early on, it revives the asylum story of you get to see Robert Englund without his makeup again.
Yeah.
And there's a moment that always makes me laugh where somebody, just in case you'd forgotten, somebody is in that sequence literally counting up the number of maniacs. So 98, 99, yeah, 100 maniacs. It's official. Just in case you need to know, there's someone counting the rapists. Fantastic. Um, and this one is, in truth, I mean, I never thought this one was up to much, but in truth, this one, after a decent-ish first section, this one's a little boring, really. I mean, Alice is back, but she seems to have lost her personality,
Yeah.
and she's pregnant, and the conceit is, I suppose, not a bad one, but doesn't quite work out. The conceit is that Freddie's going to be reborn through her unborn baby or something like that. It gets a
Yeah.
bit confusing at the end.
It does get
Um,
very confused.
and there's some continuity. Her dad is back, and he's given up drinking, so he's becomes kind of one of the few nice parents in this
Yeah.
series, which is okay. Um, but the biggest problem, I think, of all of this, it's not even the now kind of much more exaggerated Freddy stuff. It's the fact that this time they didn't come up with any likable characters for the first time in the series. These are the most irritating. Well, actually, until Freddy's dead, these are the most
Mm.
irritating, unlikable bunch of teenage. They're not even teenagers anymore, are they?
No.
Um, I mean, are we supposed to be wanting these people to die? I guess, but then what's the point? I mean, what's your thoughts on the problems of Nightmare on Elm Street 5, the Dream Child, we should say?
Oh, yeah. There are many problems, as you say. Yeah, in the beginning, you kind of have Freddy being reborn as some kind of demon baby,
Yeah,
which, as you say, is a bit off. And yeah, it is a very tenuous or tentative link, I think,
yeah,
between the fact that Freddy is coming back, because people, Alice is concerned that Freddy is back and she doesn't know why, because no one's having trouble sleeping type thing. But then she then realizes, like, she loses Dan quite early on, which is quite a big death, isn't it? There isn't very many deaths
yes,
in
actually,
this,
yeah.
and
Dan's probably the highlight. Yeah,
he does have quite a spectacular death. But yeah, when she finds out that he dies, she also finds out she's pregnant, and then for some reason, she then seems to think that Freddy's coming back through the baby.
Yeah.
And attacking all her friends again. And yeah, like you say, her friends are a very weird bunch of people. You have Mark, who is a bit of a nerd. He likes his comics and faints at the sight of blood. You have Yvonne, who just doesn't believe anything anyone says. And then you have Greta, who's just so up herself. Her death is kind of funny in a practical effects way, where she just basically dies at the dinner table at a massive social event.
Yeah, do you know what that always reminds me of? Because she's like force fed, isn't it? It has the one good one liner, which is "Bon appetit, bitch." You know, but she's force fed. It always reminds me of the just a wafer thin mint moment from Monty Python. You know? Oh no,
Mr. Creosote.
Mr. Creosote.
Yes,
it's gross for sure, and it's and I suppose at this point, I mean, the parents of her or her mum is presented as this grotesque parody, isn't she? This horrible, pressurizing showbiz mum. It's a real shame.
None of the people, as you say, are likable at all. When Mark, eventually, she gets some people to believe her, but when Mark actually dies, he falls asleep and becomes a character in his comic book, and Freddy comes back as Super Freddy. That's where I'm just like, no.
That's a low point.
I can't cope with this anymore. Super Freddy is awful.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, that whole sequence is the point where I think the series died. I mean, maybe it's a budget cut or something, but to see somebody that's been turned into a piece of paper being slashed is not really as exciting as seeing Thingy being turned into a cockroach.
Yeah, not at all.
And the dialogue is just awful.
It is, yeah, it's very awful. And it gets so confused because obviously they're trying to link back to Amanda, which is Freddy's mum and stuff, but you're never entirely sure. You know, she appeared as the white nun in the third one, but you're never entirely sure where she's kind of come from in this. And that Yvonne goes to the church or something. See, I've watched this recently and I'm still confused as to how it works.
Too. I think it's a real mess, and that's a shame. I mean, I was mostly. I mean, it's things you don't care about at this stage. No one really cares about that whole backstory. We've done it, you know.
No, it just gets silly. And
here's Amanda again.
She's got this small child that she keeps seeing called Jacob appears, which actually turns out to be her unborn child. And they totally rip off like a Labyrinth moment as well, don't they?
Yes.
The stair sequences is like lifted straight out of Labyrinth.
Yeah, it's all a bit of a patchwork. I think the Jacob stuff doesn't really work. I think because Dan dies so early and the baby thing is going on, Lisa Wilcox does a lot of kind of weeping, and she was a
bit pathetic,
a tough character in 4, and that's all wiped out by this annoying plot about the baby. And I think you're right. I think the best thing, it peaks early maybe with Dan's death is quite a cool thing where he's fused with his motorbike. It's again kind of ruined by the fact that, you know, now in all the deaths, Freddy doesn't just have one wisecrack, he has about 2 or 3. So it's enough for him to say better not dream and drive, but then he follows up with another one, you know. Old what's her face, Amanda, surrounded by pigeons. It's just.
And then he gets
not very interesting.
No, and then he kind of gets reabsorbed.
Yes,
that's his ending. I mean, he's. Alice manages to get him in her dream sequence where she kind of controls where he goes, and she gets him into the prison where his mother was, and he gets attacked by the prisoners, doesn't he? They rip his arms off and all sorts. But it doesn't really seem to stop him, so she ends up having to battle him again, and he ends up kind of getting reabsorbed by his mum, which is weird. Yeah,
because that's like his weakness, isn't it? She's the one thing he's afraid of throughout. I don't really get it, to be honest with you. I just don't get it. I didn't really want Jacob hanging around and the pigeon lady, you know. And the ending is a bit of a mess. It's kind of a spin a bit on the ending of 4 with his body being ripped apart and stuff.
Yeah.
It just seems like they were out of ideas. They were possibly working with a cut budget or a limited time frame, because even the effects, apart from Dan's death, which is really good, and the Monty Python sequence, the Mr. Creosote, the deaths are really slapdash. I mean, it's unforgivable that they did something as shit as the skateboarding Freddy with the paper geek. They should have been ashamed of themselves. I mean, worse is coming, but they should have been ashamed of themselves. And to reduce Lisa Wilcox to such a boring, crying, wet character after being so promisingly kind of proto Buffy-ish in the last one, is a real shame. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have anything else to say about part 5. It's a bit depressing for all the positives.
I think we should move on.
Let's move on. Oh God, I've seen what's next. Yeah, so we're down to the last 2 now. I mean, Freddy's dead, the final nightmare. So I get it. I mean, this happened in the early 90s. Clearly, the big guns, Michael Myers, Jason, Freddy, were past their best. So soon after this one, we had Jason Goes to Hell, which was called The Final Friday, which wasn't, but there we go. So they kind of needed to do something new or just finish them off for good. So this was, I think, an ambitious attempt to do just that. And is a lady director for the first time in the series. Rachel Talalay directed this. And it's, it looks like they spent a bit more money on it. It looks quite slick at times. It's certainly got a cast of like guest stars that are popping up, presumably because it's the last one. It was touted as being ambitiously enough. They saved the best for last on the trailers, so who wouldn't go and see it?
Oh yeah.
And the last few minutes or so, as you will kind of tell from the not too subtle prompts on screen, were in 3D in the cinema, which apparently looked terrible. I know on video they did show that sequence in 3D, and they provided you with the standard kind of cardboard glasses, but it didn't quite work. 3D never really worked on video anyway. But yeah, so Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare opens with a quote from Nietzsche, followed by a quote from Freddy himself, which is the prime time line for number 3. And it's interesting. I mean, it starts off where you think, oh, okay, this is a bit different. It's breaking out of the shackles of Elm Street or the asylum or the whatever it is, the institute for number 3. It's 10 years in the future. The idea is the entire population of teenagers are wiped out from Springwood, and there's one last survivor. I think even the opening sequence is okay on the plane with the
you get Freddy on a broomstick.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah,
kind of Wizard of Oz thing going on. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, there's the "I'll get you, my pretty" and the falling house and everything, isn't there, from Wizard of Oz? I quite like the plane paranoia, which is a bit like that old Twilight Zone episode, Nightmare at 30,000 feet, I think it's called.
Yeah.
The score is quite clever. The score is by Brian May, not that Brian May with the big hair, the other Brian May that writes movie scores. If it had a Queen score, it might have been better.
Yeah.
The score is working in parts of some of the early ones. I detected a snatch, not that kind of snatch, a snatch of like part 2, bits of part 1 score. So there's a sense that this is the end. So we're going to shove a whole bunch of stuff in. The producer, Robert Shea, who has a cameo in a lot of these things, is the cackling guy in the ticket booth early on. So there's a sense that, the gang's all back and we're going to end it. But then it kind of gets much worse and worse still.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is truly terrible, and it is worse than number 5, which is saying a lot.
Sure.
And part of it, I think, is they make the same mistake again. There's such an unlikable bunch of people in this film. I mean, what's your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, agreed. And they just add another element to Freddy's backstory, that he has a child. Before he became a child killer, he was happily married and had a daughter, as it turns out, and you don't actually know what happened to her, and all of a sudden she, all this starts coming up in Final Nightmare, and it's another group of insipid, unlikable, horrible characters, teenage characters. Although there is some kind of good deaths, but they are very drawn out, aren't they? Carlos, the deaf guy, his death is probably one of the longest. It seems to go on forever.
It
but
does.
I do like the kind of animated claymation hearing aid that kind of attacks him and makes his hearing go really sharp. And then you have Freddy like running his knives down the blackboard, and then his head
Yeah,
explodes.
yeah. If it wasn't so long, that sequence does capture like
Yeah,
Freddy's sadism, doesn't it?
it just did go on far too long. And yeah,
Yeah,
they end up in strange loops. So they're again another bunch of kids in an institution outside of Springwood. Three of them end up there on their own on a kind of joyride, and the John Doe who turns up there is the guy that was on the plane. He
yep.
doesn't know who he is, where he's going, or anything, but he just needs to go to this place. And one of the psychologists or psychiatrists at the place, Maggie, is the woman that takes him, and she is apparently Freddie's daughter. But
Mm.
it tries to lead you down a different path in thinking that John Doe is the child as well,
Yeah, that's
but they
right.
do
Yeah,
that awkwardly as well.
it doesn't work, does it? And I don't think Maggie is played by Lisa Zane. She's a kind
Oh,
of unengaging character.
very.
Um, there's an attempt for depth, I suppose. I think it's Leslie Dean that plays the kickboxing abuse victim. But I mean, that kind of theme in a movie as shallow and horrible as this seems a bit in bad taste anyway. So it's all kind of at a loss. No one cares. You know, this previously unmentioned child of Freddy just doesn't work as a plot point. It's
Mm-mm,
like a bad soap opera twist. You know,
mm-mm.
oh well, oh, it turns out he has a child. Um, yeah, it's
And
a weird film.
it is, yeah, and it's very, very plagued, as you say, by very bad 90s CGI. There's a
Oh,
moment early on in one of the dream sequence where I think John Doe is watching a kid, once again, the kids from the chanting nursery rhyme thing going up the stairs, and
yes.
he is like following her in his dream, and the CGI is so bad, you can see him moving like so slowly and stuff floating in the air. It's awful. And also at the end, Maggie has a heavy baseball bat which looks like it's metal with nails in it and stuff, and at the end she throws it away, and you can clearly hear the wood just go bing 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 as she throws it away. Yeah, it's bad. It makes a lot of
It's
mistakes.
it does, yeah, it does. And it says a lot about this film that the appearance of Roseanne, who's a horrible human
No.
being, isn't even the worst thing. I mean, it's just, normally. Although I mean, again, there could have been there's a potentially eerie sequence where they go back to Springwood, isn't there? And there's the fair, and everything's a bit weird, and there's no kids
Yeah.
around, and there are kind of parts of the rhyme scattered around the Freddy rhyme scattered around town, and
Yes.
a teacher like still going on even though his classroom is empty. Things like that, I think,
Yeah.
had potential with the premise of the film, which is maybe interesting, but none of it works at all.
No. And Freddie kind of appears and disappears, and then he's in it a little bit too long with the whole hearing aid death, and then Spencer's death in the computer game.
Oh, with the power glove, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, that's shockingly bad. Yeah, which even in 90, when was this made? 91.
91, yeah.
Even in the early 90s, that looked terrible and embarrassing. So I don't quite know what they were going for
No.
there.
And I don't get the whole 3D glasses thing.
Oh,
What is with that?
you're gonna need these.
Yeah, but she doesn't. I don't know. I don't know what they mean.
It's shocking, isn't it, that they turned this. They thought this was good enough, not just to come out as a film, but as the
Mm.
final film.
Mm.
The
It
usual. I
is.
mean, you
It
do
is
get that
embarrassing.
stuff in 3D films. You always get characters awkwardly pointing things at the camera. Oh, look at this knife! But here, the fact that they're wearing the glasses to tip you off that you've got to put them on as well is obviously terrible.
Yeah.
Um, I think it just gets worse and worse. I think the cameos are really rubbish.
Yeah.
Johnny Depp turning up for no reason, in a parody of those old "This is your brain on drugs" infomercials that used
Hmm.
to be around in the 80s. It just doesn't work. And Alice Cooper is just distracting as what's meant to be a disturbing role as Freddy's dad, which again
Hmm.
we don't need to see that.
Mm-mm.
He's been raped. His mother was raped by a lot of maniacs. His dad's abuse. All this stuff is piled on.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's terrible, and the death is terrible. The ending is a total washout. I think there's a good Iggy Pop song at the end, and that's
Hmm.
probably The one good thing.
The one good thing about the whole thing.
All the clips from the old films in the credits, and
Mm-hmm.
Yaphet Kotto. Yaphet Kotto is always good, and he's a kind of wise dream therapist kind of guy in this. And
Oh yeah.
he died last year, I think, or this year. He's a great character actor from Alien and things like that. Clearly deserved better than Freddy's Dead.
Mm.
Which yeah. Anything else to say about Freddy's Dead?
No, definitely not. Shall we move on?
Oh, thank Christ for that. Yeah, so Freddy's Dead was the end of the series. Wes Craven had remained aloof except for helping to write part 3 and bring Nancy back from the series. And he tried himself to kind of create a new character like Freddy with Shocker, which had the Horace Pinker character who travels through electricity. I went back and watched Shocker and thought it was really awful a few years ago because it does seem so desperately trying to be another Freddy film. But anyway, he was back. Wes Craven came back for what isn't a sequel. It's a kind of, I suppose, don't know really, a commentary on the Elm Street films with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which came out in 1994, which back at home in the old days we used to call Wes Craven's News Round or John Craven's New Nightmare, because hilariously there used to be a kids TV news program called News Round hosted by John Craven, no relation to Wes, so that was our thing. Didn't have a lot to do back then, so we had to make entertainment where we could. So John Craven's New Nightmare is an early version. I suppose there were a few films out around this time. Last Action Hero was around this time, which is essentially a self-destructing Arnold Schwarzenegger movie commenting on Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. And of course, Wes Craven's, apart from Vampire in Brooklyn, his next film after this was Scream, which is also very much a horror film commentating on the genre itself. So it was the era of that kind of thing. But this was early on, so this was kind of ahead of the game. And this is a film where a lot of the personnel from the Elm Street films play themselves. It was shot during a whole bunch of LA earthquakes and worked the earthquakes into the storyline, which I think is quite cool. So some of the footage you see of the city having suffered the effects of that is all real.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's really cool. The film itself was, from what I could remember and can tell, was kind of made up a bit like the film is made up by Wes Craven as he has nightmares and stuff. Heather Langenkamp in real life had a stalker, so that was worked into the plot of this. So it's this weird kind of quasi-reality that's going on, merged with the Freddy legend, which I think is really cool. I mean, I really like this film. I think this is the only way they could have really brought Freddy back was to do something totally different. And the idea is quite cool. I mean, Heather Langenkamp plays a version of herself. She's gone away from horror movies, but she's drawn back into playing another one by the kind of slick people at New Line Cinema who are all playing themselves. She has a son. I don't think in real life she had a son, but in any case, it's a fictional character in this. And she has a makeup effects artist husband who's killed quite early on. And she's being stalked, and there is a sense that her stalker might well be Freddy somehow. And meanwhile, Wes Craven is putting together a new film. He's also playing himself as this kind of deliberately arch, po-faced, slightly sinister version of himself, I guess. There's a quite funny scene, which I think was meant to be funny, in which he explains the entire plot. And gradually there's a sense that the fictional character of Freddy has escaped the prism of the films, which have now ended because of Freddy's Dead, and has crossed over into the real world of Hollywood. So Sarah, let's start with you. So what's your thoughts on Wes Craven's New Nightmare, on the whole shebang?
Yeah, I'm not a massive fan of this one, as you are.
Cool.
I think they made a lot of mistakes on this. I don't like the fact that they've changed Freddy's glove into this sinister kind of hand. Obviously, it's like animatronic in some parts. In other parts, it's not. It's attached to him. He doesn't talk a lot. He doesn't do a lot. Although it's not technically supposed to actually be Freddy, is it? It's supposed to be some kind of entity.
Yeah.
But he is wearing a very spiffing green hat. I like the hat, but yeah, I don't like the fact that it's no longer a glove; it's actually a hand with razors coming out of it. Um, I like the premise. I like the idea of bringing people back, and I thought Heather was great. Robert England playing himself, painting his pictures in his living room and stuff was really, really nice. I
Yes,
really liked him.
he's great.
He was great. Um, I think it's funny now that you've explained like the Wes Craven kind of playing a version of himself, but it's just so whispery. It's one of my pet hates. He's really whispery, and I just don't like that. And I cannot stand the kid. The kid is awful. He really put me off everything else, to be fair, with his horrendous like facial expressions and his screaming, and oh, he's in it so much. I just can't cope. I can't cope. I think the ending is pretty cool. With the effects and stuff, the kind of like Hansel and Gretel pulling him
Mm-mm.
into the fire type thing is kind of cool, and they use some good effects for it.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I'm not a huge fan.
Yeah, this is a big movie for old K&B Effects back in the day. They were obviously involved in so many of the big horror movies.
Yeah, I think
The
that's the best thing about it. Obviously.
Yeah, no, fair enough. This is one that divides people. I think ironically and interestingly, this one got some of the best reviews for Wes Craven that he'd had. Because normally, including the first Nightmare on Elm Street, wasn't well reviewed by a lot of major critics. This one was, maybe because it was so different, and maybe because it wasn't just doing the same stuff. So they were perhaps taken aback by it. I can deal with the biggest problems you mentioned. I can deal with it's a very difficult role for a very young child because he's essentially got the Linda Blair role in The Exorcist, really, complete with the
Mm.
projectile vomiting moment. He's got that role, and he's probably about 5. He's the kid from Pet Cemetery, isn't he? I don't know
Mm.
how old he's meant to be. Yeah, maybe 5, 6. I don't know, it's hard to tell. Um, and yeah, I can deal with that. I mean, I find it quite disturbing. I find those scenes quite disturbing. Maybe it's a parent thing, I don't know, but the scenes where he has fits, it does play very much on your fear of a child getting sick with no control over it, no idea what's wrong. In this case, a very unsympathetic bunch of psychiatrists come into it,
Yeah.
which I really like. I like the very thinly veiled criticism of censorship that comes into it when the shrink shows up, and she's very quick to blame horror movies.
Yeah.
When in fact we know, ironically, as the story pans out, horror movies are what effectively, in the amusing concept of the film, are essential for the survival of us.
Yeah.
That's the. But she's very much the censor board. Oh, your films have obviously tipped this child over the edge. But the movie plays with that too. I think there's some really good stuff in the early going. I think the build-up's really good. I like the creepiness of um, showing what Freddy has become, the crowd of people cheering on Freddy when Heather is
Yeah.
visibly unnerved by the surprise appearance of Robert England on the chat show. I think that's
Hmm.
really well done.
Hmm.
And I think that's, again, I would assume an element of her real life is a bit of unease by the fact that, she's tried to move on, but obviously the movies kind of follow her.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it works really well. I like the concept. I think the concept is the thing that keeps this going. The idea that um, Freddy is an ancient evil force that's kept kind of controlled by horror fiction, in this case, the Nightmare on Elm Street films. But when those films kind of trivialized him or reduced him to just a franchise, and then the franchise ended, he's the genie out of the bottle. Um,
Hmm.
and he crosses over into reality with all of the things, like you said, the obvious parallels to Hansel and Gretel that are going on. The look of Freddy is more organic, so the glove's more organic. He's made to look like an old witch, like in the fairy tale. So I
Yeah.
think that works really well for me, and I think it's genuinely creepy throughout. I really do, and it's just cool, as you said, to see some of these guys, including John Saxon.
I was going to bring him up. I love him in this. He's hilarious.
What I like about John Saxon, sadly he's no longer around, but I like the
Mm.
fact that John Saxon looked in 1994 like he did in 1963. It's just,
Yeah, true.
and probably last year before he died. But
Yeah.
yeah, he's great playing a slightly uneasy version of himself, and
Yeah.
also eventually melding into the character he played in
Yeah.
the original film. The original film is obviously a big part of this, and it's lurking in the background. Um, I think Heather does a good job. I mean, I never liked her in three, but I think she does a good job with the awkwardness of having to play yourself, or as we said, a version of yourself.
Hmm.
I think she's rather good in this. Um, and I do like the Wes Craven bit. I actually, I do
Too
like
whispery.
his because I mean I think it's meant to be a kind of parody. I think that's the
Yeah.
idea. I mean, when I rewatched it, I didn't really pick up on this before, but the bit he gives himself to say, he's almost like the ultimate ego trip. Like, well, the only way to stop him is to make another movie, and I'm your man.
Mm.
So I am going to save the world from this ancient evil presence, and he's essentially saying, well. This terrible evil thing was around until I captured him in my great first film, but the
Mm.
sequels watered it down. So he's been let free again. So I think it's not meant to be taken that seriously, but I think it works as a kind of horror movie stroke commentary on the horror genre. Yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, I think it does have some funny bits. I think it's kind of light on the kills once again, though. You
Yeah,
have one early on, and then you have the babysitter at the hospital.
I
And
like
that
that
is,
bit. Yeah,
yeah, that is it in terms of like characters dying, though. The rest is all what happens to Freddy. I mean, he has some random stuff happen to him. At one point he gets stabbed in the eye with an eel
yes, that's quite
down in the
surreal.
sewer.
Yeah,
That's kind of weird. And then the weird freaky tongue thing coming out again and wrapping around Heather's face and stuff like that.
always with the tongues.
There is some dodgy CGI bits. I think there's a bit where it's kind of like the Freddy's claws come up from the mattress and kind of sweep along the mattress. That is so badly done.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why that would have been CGI. I mean, unless they run out of time to do it. I just don't. Sometimes I don't
Mm,
get why things that could easily be done
yeah,
practically are done
practically
with
or not.
CGI. Makes
Yeah,
no sense.
yeah,
But I guess it's to do with practicalities, or maybe it was
money.
something they wanted to add later. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Um,
And yeah, I still don't like the fact that it's not a glove anymore.
yeah, it's a kind of fused with
Mm,
his hand, hasn't it? Yeah, I think it's entirely about doing the opposite of what the sequels have done. I think I presume, I don't know for sure, but I presume he wanted to avoid the set piece deaths, avoid the
yeah, maybe.
one-liners, um, change the makeup, change the even the glove. Um, I guess it was all about that, about separating it from what had happened in the meantime.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, they did it loads in the Friday the 13th movies, didn't they? Jason had a different mask
yeah,
every movie, I think.
Halloween 2 as well, Halloween movies as well. Yeah,
Yeah, they
for
changed
sure.
that a lot. So
Yeah.
why not? I just seem to take it badly. I'm offended by it.
I did think at the time, I remember the one thing, or one of the things that I thought didn't hold up as well, and probably is the same level as those things, is that at the time I remember really liking the scene on the freeway, but now that's very obviously
Oh
green
no.
screened
Yeah.
to the hilt, and I guess there's no other way to shoot a sequence like that, but that's probably just
No.
too ambitious for the type of film that this is, so it doesn't quite work. Um, but yeah, I'm on board with it. Yeah, I think I'm still on board with it. Yeah. But that, I think, I mean, obviously Freddy versus Jason came later, much
Oh
later
yeah.
actually. I think 2003, about that. Um, and I mean, I haven't rewatched it for the purpose of this podcast, but I always enjoyed Freddy versus Jason. I thought it was a great audience film, a great cinema experience to watch that.
Yeah. Yeah. Same.
Um,
Yeah. I definitely prefer it to the last few of the Elm Street movies.
yeah, they nailed it, didn't they,
Mm.
with the team up. It's I suppose on one level it's one of those movies we've always wanted to see, Freddy versus Jason. How can it
Yeah.
not be fun? But I think they made Freddy sinister enough, but they also kept, the best parts of the wisecracking half of Freddy.
Sure.
Uh,
And they didn't go over any weird backstories or anything like that. It was just
no,
Freddy is Freddy.
yeah, yeah, I will rewatch that at some point because it's one that I always held up quite high in terms of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But are we going to run down our top seven, Sarah,
Yeah,
and see how we compare? This will be
sure.
the crunch. This will sort the bad from the chaff or the good
Yep.
from the wheat. I don't know. Um, yeah. Do you want to run down? Should we do it in succession? So let's start with both of our number seven. So seven is the worst, one is the best. So what's last on your countdown?
Okay, my number 7 is Freddy's Dead. Number 6, part
Mine
6 rather.
too.
Ah,
Yeah,
amazing.
that's my last one too. Yeah,
Okay.
just it had to be that one because it's so grating.
Yeah, it's definitely the worst of the lot. What's your number 6?
My number six is The Dream Child.
Ah,
Number five.
my number 6 is New Nightmare.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
It's the kid, man. The kid ruined it for me.
I can't believe you've got such hatred for Dylan. He's just doing his
Oh,
best. He's just a young boy trying to make his life.
severe disliking for it. Severely. Oh. Okay, your number 5?
Well, my number five, my four and five, I did tussle around a bit, but I've put number four at number five. The Dream Master is my number five. I do really like it,
What?
but I just think I like the other ones more.
No way. That's crazy. Okay, my number 5 is uh The Dream Child, part 5.
Okay.
So that was
That means you like that more than New Nightmare. Oh my gosh, I gotta write
yeah.
that in my diary. Not really. I will though. Number four. What? Oh, is it my turn to say my number
Your
four?
10, yeah.
So this is the one that I do think is really good. Yeah. Okay. So number four is Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which I think
Ah.
on the repeat viewing, I still think it's creepy and weird and interesting. So yeah, that's my number four.
Oh my god, that's my number 4 as well.
Oh, cool.
So
I'm
it's
glad it was as high as that.
one that, well, yeah, exactly. There's one that I'm not particularly fond of, but it's a lot better than part 5, New Nightmare and Freddy's Dead.
And it's just weird. I think maybe it's the one that will always be interesting for lots of
Yeah.
reasons. It's just genuinely weird. Maybe in ways that the others are not. But yeah, there was a time when there was no way I would have put that above number four because I always liked number four a lot. But yeah. Okay, so my number three, oh dear. My number three is Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
No.
That's where it finished up. What's your number three?
What? My number 3 is part 3, Dream Warriors.
Dream Warriors.
Yeah.
Excellent, which is a great choice because number two for me is Dream Warriors because it's
Ah.
probably the one I watch the most and it's still loads of fun. Your number
Okay.
two?
My number 2 is part 4, Dream Master, because it's
Ah,
way better than those guys down the bottom. It does not deserve to be down the bottom. Where did you have it? Number 5?
I had it at five, but it was close between that and number two at 4 and 5. Yeah, it was close up there.
No, it's definitely my number 2. Love it.
What a shocker! And I don't want to say that the suspense is over, but by the process of elimination, it would appear
We have the same
that
number 1.
yeah, and there's no question really.
Hooray.
I could never, even before the rewatches, I had no inkling that there would be a
No,
change at the top because there just
same.
isn't. It's a classic, the original, for good reason.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. My top 3, yeah, which would be the original part 4 and part 3, are the ones that I will happily revisit
Yeah,
as often as I can. The rest, I'm not so keen on. I don't think I need to watch them anymore.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't want to ever watch 5 or 6 again. But the others,
No.
actually, I would. I can see myself watching the others, but 5 and 6 were actually quite painful this time. I think they always were, but this time especially painful. Damn them all to hell. Yeah, and that's it for the Nightmare on Elm Street. That was a fun thing to talk about and to revisit, actually.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was great. Good old nostalgia trip.
It was a massive nostalgia trip. Those movies, and yeah, especially things like Part 3 were a huge part of that time of watching stuff and renting videos. Yep, and it's all over, unfortunately. But there will be, no doubt, other Freddy films at some point, and hopefully they'll be better than the remake that came out not so long ago.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we need more Freddy versus.
I think so. Yeah, they will find a way to bring it
do
back.
Freddy versus Ash.
Freddy vs. Ash was a really good comic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff worked well as comics, and I think Freddy vs. Jason worked really well on the cinema, or on the big screen. So it can be done. We
Yeah.
shall see. Well, that's it. Unfortunately, that is, as they say, all we have time for, except to say that next time will be a bit of a change of pace. We're going to be switcherooing to a different medium. We're going to be looking at television horror next time. In particular, we're going to have a special guest star and old friend of the podcast, Matt Blissett, who will be on to join us for a three-way, three-way,
Hey.
three-way discussion of our favourite, or at least a TV show in the horror vein that we particularly like. And we'll have a bit of a chew around kind of other ones over the years that we consider standouts. But we'll each be choosing a favourite TV horror show and having a chat about it, and look at some of our other kind of notable picks through the years. That's next time. So stay tuned for that. We'll be recording at the end of May, so it'll go live the last Friday of next month. But otherwise, I think that's it. That's all we've got. It's spent, and yeah, it's been good though.
It has been fun.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, of course. Any further thoughts, Sarah, before we sign off and disappear into the plague-ridden night?
No, I think that is it. I think Nightmare on Elm Street has well and truly been covered, for sure.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the next one. So yeah, hope everyone is still staying safe.
Yeah, do stay safe out there. Obviously, still not safe to lick lampposts and that kind of stuff, or hump strangers. Not
I
for at
wonder
least
if it
another
ever
few
will be
months.
again. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. I mean,
The
we had
things
the
you miss,
chance.
eh?
Yeah. Subway, frottagings, and that kind of stuff. It is a shame, but there we go. At least the great gods of entertainment have given us 3 million things to choose from
Oh yeah.
to watch on any given night. We'll never live long enough to watch even like 1/5 of the things we want to watch. But there we go. God bless them. But yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. Do stay safe out there, and obviously do send us some kind of message to say you're enjoying the podcast through the usual channels if you can, and we'll return with a TV chat next time. But until then, it's obviously good night from me.
And good night from me.
Bye for now. Bye.
Bye.